This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com. And today, as a special guest interview, we have Big Bill Anderson, former WWE competitor. He's also wrestled literally everywhere. He was also a referee for WWE, ring announcer for WWE, and he's an author. And we're going to get into mostly fan questions today. We had over 100 fan questions. We're not going to do all of them, but we'll get into as many as we can. How are you today, sir?
I am doing fantastic, Devin, and I really appreciate the opportunity to answer some questions here. Thank you.
And I've known you through superstar Billy Graham, who actually wrote the foreword to at least one of your books. You have three books that fans can order if they're interested. And the ones, I guess, with Billy Graham's forward on it, he is personally signed, which is worth the cost of the book right there.
Right. I sell this book here for $20. Billy's autograph is usually $35 or above alone, and it comes with this book. Billy wrote the foreword for this book graciously, and that is part of the order of that book. Yes.
Where could we order your books to get that out of the way?
I have a very small website. It's called bigbillanderson.us. Well, I'm sorry. I just went blank on my own website. bigbillanderson.us, I believe. Yes, .us. I'm sorry.
And of course, I didn't mention in the introduction, one of your greatest accomplishments. Someone mentioned you should be in the Hall of Fame for trainers if there was one. You have trained countless stars in the wrestling business. Probably the two biggest names are Sting and the Ultimate Warrior, but you trained enough stars to have a whole book on that as well.
Right. And actually, that's kind of what I did in my first book, was a tribute to many stars that came through my wrestling school. Louie Spicoli is one of my bigger friends and stars that passed away when he was only 27. As you know, we could do a whole video just on the people that have passed away in our industry, friends of ours, dear friends of ours that are gone. And I did a book on Louie Spicoli and the Angel of Death and Sting and Warrior. That's my tribute book back to those gentlemen and ladies. Magnificent Mimi, I worked with her. Missy Hyatt, a few other girl wrestlers came through that I worked with, and it was a real honor to train all of them. And it made a lasting impact on my life, especially Louie Spicoli.
And Louie was just getting over. He was probably at his popularity peak in WCW. He also had the run in WWE as Radford, but they were letting him do commentary, which is where he was really starting to shine, when unfortunately, I believe it was an overdose or something, like so many wrestlers.
Yeah, it was. He mixed wine and soma and maybe 40 or 50 soma. It wasn't just like one or two pills and have a glass of wine. It was 2 or 3 bottles of wine, 40 or 50 somas, because he had built up such a tolerance to it. And he was only 27 when he was found dead in his bedroom, laying on the floor. He basically choked in his own vomit, just like Janis Joplin died. The same type of thing, just was incoherent to breathe properly. And Louie, that took a piece of my heart. That was February 15th of 98. And I'll never forget it. He was my best friend for 10 years. I trained him right out of high school. One of the greatest kids I've ever known. He worked for ECW too. And his problem was he sustained a lot of injuries in wrestling for that brief period of time in 10 years. And a lot of them were wrestling Mark Henry in WWF or WWE at the time. He sustained a lot of injuries, and he started masking them like so many people do. We've all been there and done that. To compensate for the pain, you start over-medicating. And he took it further and further and further. He wasn't into coke or, none of those kind of things. It was all prescription drugs, which doesn't make it any better. Death is still death. But he did pass away at 27 years of age, and it's just so sad.
And he was also known as Madonna's boyfriend in Mexico. I remember that from the wrestling magazines. Did you get him booked in Mexico? I know you have a whole book on the fallen Mexico wrestlers. You were over there.
No, I did not. I believe he got in through either Eddie Guerrero or he became friends with Art Barr somewhere along the line, and that's how he got in. I didn't have anything to do with that, but I was there at his shows in Los Angeles at the Sports Arena when AAA came in and did shows, and I was a part of those as a ring announcer even for a AAA show, which was a catastrophe as a ring announcer. A gringo with a 99% Hispanic crowd really went south real fast, and Antonio Pena kind of pulled me like almost mid-show, like this is not working, and I understood that perfectly. But I was around all of those shows, and but see, again, Lewis is hanging out with Art Barr, and there's a lot of influence there with prescription drugs, especially in Mexico, where it's so easy to get. It's just a downward spiral, that a lot of guys fall into.
I've heard in Mexico, I don't know if it was like that when you were there, but I've heard through several of my wrestling friends that have worked there that in the dressing rooms, it's not uncommon for cocaine use to be seen. Did you ever notice anything like that?
I honestly did not ever see any of that myself. And I was in Mexico. Mine was in the 80s, the mid 80s, 86 and 87. I was in Guadalajara. I spent a couple of weeks down there, Mexico City, wrestling at Arena Mexico and in Guadalajara. I did not personally see any of that, but I know of guys that were doing it, but I didn't see any of it. I personally, and I tell you if I did.
And you also spent some time in the American Wrestling Association, which was run by Vern Gagne. Any memories of that?
Yeah, I did a lot of TV tapings in Las Vegas for Vern. Vern was a very professional guy, so old school. It's unbelievable how old school he was. It was nothing like of today's. No one today would even understand the dressing room mentality. It was really good. It was really at the Showboat Hotel. The dressing rooms were in opposite corners of the building, so the heels are in one side, babies in another, and so there's no interaction. And it was just a really clean, easygoing show. And I had a chance to wrestle Curt Hennig, Jimmy Snuka, Bob Orton, Pat Tanaka, Paul Diamond. Oh my God, Buddy Rose, just any number of guys in the mid 80s before they were either coming back from WWF to AWA or vice versa. And I had a chance to work with a lot of great talent. And but I love working for Vern. Vern was very professional, and Vern would pay us a couple $100 for the TV tapings, which was very good, because when I talked to like Jannetty and Michaels there, they were really upset because they weren't getting paid at all for TV. It was a free thing that they did as publicity for Vern. It's part of their weekly stop in, do TV, and there was no additional pay for them. So when they heard we were getting our room taken care of and our trans and everything, and a couple $100, they were upset. I remember talking to Jannetty and Michaels both, and they were upset.
Well, it kind of makes sense in some ways because the TV time is basically an advertisement for them, and
That's
you're putting them over.
exactly. That's how it was explained to them. And it's just like, well, sorry. That's all I did for a living. I needed that couple $100 coming up, shooting up. It was only 4 or 5 hours, 4 hours. I mean, for 3.5 hours from LA, where I live, to go up to Vegas. And I love Vegas, and it's not for gambling. I'm not a gambler or any of the other stuff. I just love Vegas. It's just a beautiful, beautiful place to go.
And I understand, as you mentioned, you wrestled Jimmy Snuka. I saw you posted the other day that you had seen numerous episodes of The Dark Side of the Ring, including that one. What were your thoughts on that episode?
It's very sad to me because I'm always sympathetic for a victim. I always am. And I understand that this young lady passed away, and through whatever happened, I don't know exactly. No one knows except Jimmy and her, obviously. But I'm sad for her and her family that had no closure really on this whole event. But I also know Jimmy from another side, through the business of traveling with them through many Arizona reservation shows with Steve Gatorwolf in the 80s and 90s. We would travel in cars together and wrestling him in Hawaii. Him and Rocky Johnson were running opposition to Leah Maivia at one time in 87. And I would go over with my partner, Tim Patterson, and wrestle Rocky and Jimmy and Rocky Johnson. And so I knew Jimmy from a whole nother side. I had done the day my son was born. Jimmy, I saw him in Long Beach at the convention center for a show. He gave me a big hug, shook my hand, and when I pulled my hand back, a $50 bill in it, and he says, "Brother, get the little guy something from the Superfly." How many guys do that kind of thing? He had a heart of gold, and I remember Jimmy from so many events I worked with him on that I saw a complete different side of him. I wasn't in a hotel room with him in his personal life like that, intimate. I was on the road with him as a worker, and I absolutely loved him. And he's one of a half a dozen guys that I am not embarrassed to say I could not stop crying when I found out he passed away. And I know he lived a long life. He wasn't like a 27-year-old like Louie Spicoli, but I shed buckets for him because I knew the heart that man had. And I'll never forget Jimmy Snuka and all the pictures I took with him, and him meeting my son, him holding my son when he's 3 or 4 months old. Those kind of photos, you can't forget that kind of stuff.
And you mentioned that him and Rocky Johnson were running opposition to Leah Maivia. Wasn't Leah Rocky Johnson's mother-in-law?
Yes, that's what was so crazy. And me as Bill Anderson, I never proclaimed to be one of the Anderson brothers and all that thing. But when I worked for Rocky, he wanted me to tell people I was an Anderson brother because Lars Anderson was booking for Leah Maivia and Ripper Collins was booking for him, for Jimmy and Rocky. So Rocky would have me go out to the ring and stand there and say, "I don't care what Leah Maivia and my brother are doing over on the other side of the islands." Just ridiculous stuff. It was just family games, but they were seriously running opposition to Leah. They didn't want to work for her anymore. They wanted to start their own promotion. So they actually put the belts, their tag team belts, on myself and Tim Patterson for a couple of shows, which was a big thing. You know, Jimmy to lay down in the ring for me? Are you kidding? I'm a mark, I mean, to a point. I understand the relevancy of that, of Rocky and Jimmy laying down for two guys from California. But that was business. And they knew to win the belts back, they would pop the crowd. And that's exactly what they did. But I worked a few shows for Rocky and Jimmy over there.
And I saw you made a post last week involving a couple pictures of you and Brody, and one with Brody, you and your ex-wife. Yep. It seems you're pretty upset still over the travesty that happened there. Could you give us your thoughts on that? And for people that most of us have never met him in person, what he was like outside the ring?
I loved Brody from the time I was with him. I was only around him on some AWA shows too, because he was working for Vern in the I don't know, around 86 or 87, somewhere around there. I don't know. I was doing tapings through several years there, and Brody was working on those tapings, and Brody worked against my tag team partner, Tim Patterson, on one show there. And Tim said that when Brody threw him into the ropes and he came off and Brody kicked him with the boot, he said, Tim said he was seeing cross-eyed for a couple of days, but he said Brody was stiff, but working stiff. And he was fine with it because he knew it was an honor to be in the ring with Bruiser Brody. But when I was around Brody, he was very quiet, very professional, very, very nice. And I found him to be just a wonderful man. And it was just a year later after I was around him in California, that he was murdered in Puerto Rico. And that is the biggest travesty of justice I can think of what Jose Gonzalez got away with. And for that matter, Carlos Colon and Victor Javica were involved in it too. They all knew it was a setup, and they let the man walk in and just follow through to his death in that shower. And I think that is just horrendous. It's like I said on Facebook, if you don't like the guy, don't book him. Don't use him. That's a simple way to pay a guy back. You know that. If you don't like a guy, don't use him. Don't let the guy's phone ring, and that'll take money out of his pocket, and then you don't have to see him on the islands. But to use him, bring him in. This man had a wife and a 7-year-old son, and to bring him in and murder him, and it was premeditated. That's why Gonzalez took the knife into the shower. That's what upsets me. It's not like, just a little thing got out of control in the dressing room, a little fist fight, and Gonzalez picked up a knife, and that would have been a little more toward a self-defense. But there is no self-defense when you've wrapped a knife in a towel and walked into the shower knowing darn well what you're going to do with that. You don't take a big knife for no reason into the shower. Who does that? So, yeah, it's still very upsetting. I remember it in 88, just like I remember it today. And it's still, I'm just getting fired up just thinking about it because, as Tommy Rich would say, somebody say something about being fired up. I'm fired up about Brody's murder. That really is horrendous.
And you mentioned Tommy Rich. I've heard from a few people he was possibly the most beloved wrestler by the ladies of all time. Did you ever notice that?
Yeah, I was actually wrestling in Tennessee in 1975 when he was first starting out, and just a young kid. He was driving big Cadillac convertible red. I remember it, a red Cadillac, and everybody had CB radios back in those days. I was only 18 years old. I was just a punk kid, maybe 17, working for Nick Goulas and Jerry Jarrett. I was wrestling as Bill Colt. With Chris Colt was my partner, which is a whole nother topic. Him and Mike Boyette, so that, you know the party that went down there. And so I was on the road. I wrestled Tommy Rich several times. He was just a kid. I was just a kid, but he was talented, and he was over with those Southern fans. And those guys knew how to book shows down there in Tennessee in 75. We were running 3 shows a night. They were running literally 30 shows a week down there. It was big time wrestling for them people. And they were selling out all these little armories. To the Mid-South Coliseum was always full, to Nashville Fairgrounds, to all these places. But I wrestled Tommy Rich a lot, and he was really over with the fans. Just a good-looking kid.
And I guess that was the territory known for the groupies. A good place for you to be at 18.
Yeah, I won't tell you those stories, but yes, Alabama was one of the best.
And for Chris Colt, a lot of modern wrestling fans probably have no idea who he is. I've only seen some of his stuff over the past few years, but that's one guy that has a lot of behind the scenes stories about him. And he kind of worked everywhere, but never quite exploded. But he was certainly a good talent. Could you fill us in a little bit on him?
Yeah, Chris was his own worst enemy. Like a lot of wrestlers, they have their own worst enemy is right there. And Chris was a case of beer drinker a day, maybe a bottle or two of Southern Comfort, maybe a big baggie full of marijuana during the day, and maybe a few pills here and there, maybe a little bit of acid. And that would be almost a normal day for him. So to go out and wrestle, and especially down south, and put up with Nick Goulas, who was the biggest and nicest, I found, redneck promoter around. Nick didn't put up with that stuff, drinking and all that stuff. He always told us, I don't want to see any of those marijuana pills in the dressing room. That's how old school he was. He didn't even understand. But Chris was very crazy, very wild, and he burned himself out of a lot of territories because of his partying ways, coming into a show just wasted. And he was just so full of talent. He could outbump most anybody on any show. He was doing dives off the top rope, flat on his belly, with not even putting his hands down or feet down, flat on his belly, long before anybody else. He was doing these in the early 70s when it was just unheard of. And he thought nothing of laying it all on the line at every match to excite the fans. And him being portrayed at one time as more like a Hell's Angel kind of guy, that really riled up the people, especially in the South, of long hairs. And I had long blonde hair at the time. And Mike Boyette had two-tone hair, like blonde and dark. And so we were just a wild trio of guys. So the fans, the Southern fans, really despised us quite a bit. But Chris was way ahead of his time, but he burned himself out.
And I heard he's not the type of guy you'd want to go to a bar with because he would often cause scuffles.
Chris always told me, he says, if you want to get in a fight, throw as much crap in their face as possible and intimidate them, and hopefully they'll back down. And that was more or less his the way he did business. He would get right in your face and intimidate you to the point where you have to either punch them or just like back off. And that's what his mentality was. And 99.9% of the time, they backed off from him. The one time they didn't was a fight alongside of a highway that Chris was so drunk. We were leaving Johnson City, Tennessee. This is probably September of 75. And he was sitting in the back seat. Chris was in the back seat. Mike Boyette, who was a judo champion, very tough man. Mike Boyette was in the passenger side. I was driving. Well, Chris was so drunk, he reached around and punched me in the side of the face. He was just wasted. And he pulled Mike's hair. He almost pulled Mike's hair to the back seat, almost all the way. And Chris said, pull the car over. He says, I'm going to kick both of your asses. What? I'm just a kid. We're a team. We're friends. This isn't work. What the hell's going on? Boyette said, pull the car over. Pulled the car over. Chris got out of the car, punched me square in the jaw, then walked around to the passenger side to where Boyette was, threw a punch at Boyette, and Boyette said, don't ever hit me again. I'll give you, this is the only warning I'm going to give you. Don't ever hit me again. Chris went to throw another punch. Mike blocked the punch, hooked him in a front face lock, and just like Hogan did to Belzer, that comedian, put him in the front face lock, just choked him out. Chris fell back on the pavement. I mean, he put it into that in 30 seconds. It was over. Boyette gets behind the wheel of the car, backs the car up. This is in the middle of the day. This is 2 a.m. in the morning on a desolate highway heading back to Nashville, where we had an apartment. Pulls the car back about a quarter of a mile or eighth of a mile back. Full speed ahead, right at Chris's body on the side of the road. He was going to run him over, and I jerked the wheel just at the last second. So shoot, jerked the wheel and saved Chris's life. That's how intense things got with the drugs and the drinking and everything down there. Our own team were turning on each other. And so I saw a lot of violence and a lot of insanity as a youngster down there when I was just starting out in the business. I was only a year into the business, and I'm seeing more than I ever wanted to see.
And you've managed to keep yourself sane, unlike a lot of the guys, unfortunately.
This is why at some jobs I've had, people are like, I can't believe you used to wrestle. And I says, I know. It's like getting out of prison. I've never been in prison, but I suppose it's like getting out of prison and trying to restart your life. And it's like, and deal with normal people on the outside with technology and everything else. I was used to 8 and 10 and 12-hour road trips. They called Tennessee the gasoline circuit. That was its nickname back in the day, because we would drive 300 and 400 miles between shows and think nothing of it. And as a kid, I was making good money because I was connected to Colt and Boyette and eventually Bill Dundee. I was connected with those guys, which put me on the topper echelon, thank God. Otherwise, I would have been starved out of the territory like a lot of guys were. Some guys were only making a couple hundred for the week, 150 for a week. I was making 750 for an 18-year-old kid. That was phenomenal money. And Colt was making like 1,500. Dundee and Boyette, of course, were making big money. I was getting paid the minimum at the top rung because I was with Colt, not because of my talent. I know that. Hanging out, got Bill Colt as my name. And that's the only place I used that name. After we split up, and again, it was because of the drinking, that was the end of Bill Colt, and I was fine with that. But it was crazy.
Well, I heard Terry Funk say once that in the older days, a lot of wrestlers really couldn't have functioned in regular society, and wrestling was the only job that they could have due to whatever mental health and drug issues they had.
Yeah, it's tough. It's you know it. I mean, I'm certainly not trying to sell you on this. You know how tough it is. And to be on the road and to be signing autographs and the women, oh my God, the insanity. It's no wonder, I've been married a couple of times and all the other, because of just so much that goes into it. I worked for 17 years in this business before my first Japan tour for FMW in 1991. And then I went through 5 one-month tours for FMW in 91, 92, and 93, 5 tours of a month. And on the last tour I was doing in 93, my wife gave me the ultimatum of everything I've worked for in this business. She gave me the ultimatum: when you come back, when you come back, I'll be gone. I can't handle you gone this much. I don't care what money you're making. It don't matter. I'm done. And like a fool I am, I went to Japan. It was what my life was from a teenager. It's everything I worked my butt off for. everyone knew in the business, especially when I started in the 70s, early 70s. Japan or Australia or those kind of places, that's when you made it, was to go to Japan. Everything, you could be a States wrestler all your life, but if you can't say you ever went to Japan, people always look down on you a little bit. And I said, I got to go to Japan. I've earned this. I have worked my ass off all my life. And I went to Japan, and sure enough, my wife left. And I paid the price.
Was it the Sheik that got you booked in FMW? Because I know you were close with him.
No, it was actually Red Bastien. What happened was Red Bastien was handling the passports for at Sushi Onita. He was doing at the consulate in Los Angeles. He was the go-to guy to handle processing the passports, getting them stamped, getting their working papers in order for the guys to go to Japan. And finally, Red says, he called me and he says, I'm done with this. He says, they're paying me $50 per man. Red just didn't want to take the time to do it. And there was like 3 and 4 and 5 guys a month. I'm thinking that's a couple $100, $200, $300 for me to drive into Los Angeles. I lived in San Bernardino, which is 60 miles away. So I'll certainly do that. And Red says, job's yours. I'll tell them over there, you're the new go-to guy. So I did that for about a year, processing Mike Awesome in Florida, Mark Starr in Florida, Jimmy Backlund in Florida, different guys in different places. I processed their paperwork, got it all stamped, and Chris Champion, different guys. And finally, a guy named, I can't think of his name, a guy in Japan that was their office guy that spoke fluent English. He contacted me and asked me if I'd be willing to come over and work for the company. They know I'm a wrestler, so would I want to wrestle there? And of course, I jumped at the chance. And I asked Louie Spicoli, they wanted me as the mercenaries wearing a camouflage gimmick. And I said, yeah, I'll go and I'll take Louie Spicoli with me. But Louie had a girlfriend and he was having problems with her. So he wanted to stay home. So I took a guy named Lou Fabiano that lived in New York, New Jersey. Great guy, great talent. And I took Lou Fabiano with me, and we had fantastic matches over there in Japan, my first tour. And I was with the Sheik and Sabu. And what an honor it was to meet the Sheik for the first time. I'll never forget it. You know, we walk onto the bus. They picked us up at Narita Airport, walk on this dark bus, and in the front seat is a Sheik on one side, Sabu on the other. And Sheik sticks his hand out. He goes, I'm the Sheik. And I go, brother, I'm from Detroit. I was born and raised in Detroit. I perfectly know well who you are, my friend. You are a legend. So we became friends instantly because of me being a Detroit boy. I knew his legacy in Detroit. And I was honored to wrestle him many times and team with him over there.
I always consider him the greatest heel of all time just because he was the most attacked heel of all time. Where would you rank him?
Oh, I would definitely say he was at the top. I saw many shows at Cobo Arena against him and Terry Funk, him against Dory Funk Jr., him against Bobo Brazil, of course. Those matches, him and Pampero Firpo teaming up against the Funks. I saw several of those in the summers. I would go back and visit my dad in Detroit in the 72, 73, 74. I'd go back and visit my father, and he would take me to Cobo. Well, the Sheik was he'll always be number one to me. I was actually offended when the Iron Sheik created that name, the Iron Sheik, because then many people thought he was the only Sheik, the newer. Yes. And I was just like, you don't have any clue. There was a Sheik before him, and it was a great Sheik.
Now that the internet has become so popular, I think that the original Sheik has kind of overcome that. But for a while, you're right. Whenever you said the Sheik, people would automatically think of the Iron Sheik.
Exactly. When I post pictures, I used to, and I still do sometimes. I think I put original Sheik when I write the caption, because I can't just say the Sheik on a lot of things, because people go, that doesn't look like the Iron Sheik. And it's like, oh my God. So yeah, it was a horrible thing. I want to tell you one more funny thing. I think you'll get a kick out of this. It was during that first tour with the Sheik, he confided in me when he met me on the bus that he didn't know any of these young guys. He didn't know Big Titan, Rick Bogner from Calgary. He didn't know any of us guys because we had guys from Mexico on the tour, Ultraman, different guys from Florida, Mike Mike Awesome, Mark Starr. He didn't know any of us from nothing. He was old school. And he told me later that he said, I shook hands with you with my right hand, but on my left hand, I had razor blades on my fingers. He says, because I'm an old guy. And he says, I wanted to make sure that nobody took advantage of this old guy. He says, of course, I had Sabu across the aisle who was watching everybody walk onto the bus that we were picking up at the airport. Different times we waited for everybody to come off the planes and go through checkout, get their luggage. So he says, but I was ready. And I says, oh my God, it's a good thing I'm just such an easy natured guy. And I respected the man so much. It would be ridiculous. I'd never even think of doing something like that to the Sheik. That would be ridiculous. But he was ready.
Wasn't Chris Jericho on some of those tours as well?
Or before me.
Okay.
He was on the tour before me, Chris Jericho. And I heard that they just didn't like him. And it wasn't for his talent. He was too pretty. He was too good looking. And that's a shoot. That's exactly what I heard. All the guys said, oh, wait, Onita didn't like him. He was too handsome, too young. He just looked too good. And it didn't matter about his talent. That's why they had me working under a mask. Because at the time, I was a little more handsome than I am now. That was 30 years ago. I had dark hair, no gray, no wrinkles, bags.
You were a male model type back in the day from the pictures.
Yeah, it was a totally different thing. So they did not want me to be like a Rick Martel looking kind of guy with minus the body, of course, because I didn't have a body like Martel. But they didn't want that. They wanted to cover me up and be a gimmick. So I wrestled 2 tours as the Mercenaries, 2 tours as a single as Starman. And then I wrestled my final tour as the Psychos with Tim Patterson as my partner. And we were wearing white masks and just a stupid gimmick. They covered me up, which sucks because, I had a chance to get in the ring with Leon Spinks and do a boxer wrestler thing. And there I am wearing a mask. And, I would have been proud to have shown, hey, there's Bill Anderson, but people just have to take my word. It was me.
Now, you were an enhancement wrestler for WWE as well as a ring announcer and referee. So you did it all. How did you get into that side of it with World Wrestling Entertainment?
Okay. What happened was I was wrestling for Mike LeBell in 1982. Tom Ernesto was the booker, former assassin, and Tom was the booker. I wrestled in August of 82 for Mike, came in. Mike had his final show, I think it was December 26th of 82, and he was selling out to Vince. We didn't know, none of us knew about it until the last week. Well, I'm like, I don't know. I was like 26, 27 years old. I'm just a kid still. And this is all I did for a living. And it's like, now I'm stuck in Los Angeles and nowhere to go. And Mike pulled me aside on the last show and he says, I'm going to try to take care of you. I got some things ahead. I'm planning ahead here. I'm selling out to Vince. I'm closing my territory. I have a no compete clause for 10 years in my contract with Vince. I will not promote any more shows. But I got along great with Mike LeBell. Mike was strictly business, but I treated Mike with a lot of respect, and Mike treated me with respect back. And he says, I'm going to try to take care of you. He says, just be patient with me. So in 1983, March of 83, Vince expanded to California. And Pat Patterson was booking then, and they had road agents, Strongbow, Goulet, all those guys, Jack Lanza, and Grizzly Smith, different people were agents. And I got a call from Jeff Walton, working for Michael Bell, and he says, Mike told me to book like 6 or 8 local guys on the upcoming Los Angeles Sports Arena shows. And he says, you're one of the top guys we're going to book, as well as John Tolis, Black Gordman, the Great Goliath, Wildman Jack Armstrong, Rick Drayson, different guys. And he says, so we got you booked on these shows. Of course, you're going to be enhancement. What else, And hey, that's cool. Working for the big leagues. And I started working those shows in March of 83, and it became Los Angeles like once a month, San Diego once a month, Bakersfield, Fresno, sometimes the Cow Palace, different shows along the way, Modesto, Stockton, different shows. And I was booked solidly as a wrestler just 3 or 4 or 5 times a month. but that was still at $200 or $300 a shot. Sometimes only 150, depended. Hey, that's all supplementing my monthly income from my family. Or, I wasn't married then, but that's supplementing
That's
me.
in the 80s too. That's
And,
worth a lot more now.
yeah, and I was paying like 400 rent or something. It's like, paying my rent and 2 nights of working for WWF, and I still got like 15 independent shows, working Mexico, going over to Hawaii, or going here, there, working independents for Steve Gatorwolf in Arizona. He'd take me for like 3, 4, 5 days at a time. We do reservations. I get a minimum 100 a night there. So I was doing fine working for Vince like that. I was very happy. And then what happened was, I slowly ended up being phased into a referee spot. They started expanding out and bringing full talent in. They were taking their time with it because they didn't want to fly out 18 guys to a show when they first started. So they'd only fly out like 6 or 8 guys, whether it was like Bob Backlund, the Strong Bows, Ivan Koloff, all those kind of guys. They would just fly out those. They'd bring Ray Stevens in from Frisco, or different guys. They finally started booking a full crew, and then it became more of a standby wrestler spot. And I still filled in wrestling different guys when they needed me. But when they didn't need me as a wrestler, I would referee on the show. And then what happened was, because of Red Bastien, once again, I became in charge of the ring crew on the West Coast. So that gave me another $200 or $300 a night. My part, because I paid my ring crew. And so I did that for a few years, all through the West Coast, even to Phoenix, setting the ring up. And then I'd still referee on the shows or wrestle on the show. So I was ending up with $400, $500, $600 a night working then. And I was doing just fine until 1988, I believe it was. Maybe it was late 87. I think it was early 88. Lee Marshall was the WWF ring announcer for the West Coast, and he jumped ship and went to work for Vern in the AWA. And I showed up at the LA Sports Arena one night. I was wearing a suit. I was a standby wrestler. I always felt like I wanted to be professional, like Mil Moskris and all the guys would always dress real professional. And Bastien always told me, dress professional, always showcase yourself. And Red was my mentor. So I showed up wearing a suit, and Strongbow comes up to me about 6 o'clock, I should say. And he says, Billy, have you ever done any ring announcing? And I says, yeah, actually I have. He says, where? I says, in Phoenix in 1973, in front of like 300 or 400 people at the Phoenix Madison Square Garden Arena, little independent stuff with Kurt Von Steiger, the guy that trained me. I said, I did some ring announcing. I was just a kid. He says, okay, I'm glad to hear you did some ring announcing. He says, well, to let you know, Lee Marshall is done with us. He quit, gave us no notice really whatsoever. We know now he's not going to be here tonight. And it was literally, I believe it was like a sellout crowd or near it, 15 to 16,000 people out there, going to be out there. Chief told me what the advance was. He says, I need you to ring announce. Well, I was a nervous wreck. I said, Chief, I haven't done ring announcing since 73, and we're talking 88. It was 15 years. I said, I can't do this. He says, Billy, you're the ring announcer. You've done it. Do it. Do the best you can. And I went out there and I did do the best I can, and they loved me. And I ended up being their ring announcer from San Diego, Bakersfield, all through many of the California towns. They even flew me to Honolulu several times to work the Blaisdell Arena. They flew me to Seattle, to Denver, Colorado, and different places. I had a great job for a number of years until they stopped booking me as an announcer because they started using their TV announcers on house shows. It's kind of like the mid 90s. Things were changing. It's that Attitude Era. Everything became a different business. It became the Monday Night Raw and all this other and SmackDown or whatever, and all these different shows. Life changed, and I accepted that.
Now, you mentioned last week you actually got a lot of publicity over this. You were in the arena, I think it was the LA Sports Arena, when the infamous thing happened with David Schultz that they talked about on the Dark Side of the Ring last week. Could you tell us your view of that?
There, I was not in the dressing room when apparently there was an altercation with Mr. T and David, and I was not out by the ring where their altercation was. I was in the waiting area behind the curtain, and before you go into the dressing rooms, I was kind of just there, probably hanging out with my buddies, just mingling. Different people had come out of the dressing room. I'd be just shooting the crap. But I want to clear up something that I looked back and I actually looked at the results through WWE's website or through something that they have the results
History
of their
of
show.
WWE.
Yeah, the WWF results. Hogan was not even on that show that night. Hogan.
Interesting.
Yes, and if you look it up, I'll tell you, it was like I think it was March, not March. It was February, I believe, of '85. And if you look at the results of that show, there even is a part that says on there, "This is the night David Schultz got fired." And I looked at the whole lineup. Hogan was not even there. He was not even on the shows. So how could he stand there and say, "I watched him get bitch slapped"? Totally wrong. Totally wrong. Totally lie. Fabrication for ratings or whatever to make things look good. And the same goes for that matter. Well, I'll just tell you. So anyway, I saw David Schultz come out of the dressing room and just like walk right to the curtain. He wasn't, the guys were already in the ring. Whoever it was in the ring. And it was after intermission, I believe. And he went off and I never saw T. I didn't pay attention to T that night, really. But I saw Schultz leaving the dressing room and go through the curtain. It's like, well, some guys went through the curtain to watch the matches just at the edge of the curtain. Security was there, police and everything else. But then I saw Jay Strongbow about 6 feet behind him walking, and he went through the curtain, and I could hear him say, "Get that guy, bring him back here now. Do not let him make contact with anyone." And that's all I saw for a few minutes. And all of a sudden, then I see Schultz come back, and he's being manhandled by these two cops. And he's resisting, but not violently, but he's letting them know he's not happy. And Schultz is a good sized guy, and everyone knows he's got a temper. And so the cops ended up laying him on the ground, and they told him to calm down. He wouldn't calm down. And more cops came. No shotguns. They would not have had shotguns in an arena full of people. That's absolutely ridiculous. Like they're going to fire off and kill 10 stands. The stands were right at the edge of the curtain. You could actually see the butts of them sitting there in the bleachers. There was no shotguns like they said in that documentary. None. Tell you that for a fact. But I was wrong in one thing, because when I went back and looked at the results of that show, I saw Dynamite and Davey Boy were not even on that show either. And I'm the one that said that they were there. It was Jim Neidhart is the one that came running out, because Jim's a pretty hothead. And at the time, God bless the man. He was a great guy. And Neidhart came out to get involved, and the cops and Strongbow pushed him back verbally. Just go back in the dressing room. Don't get involved in this. Don't get involved in this. And so Schultz is laying on the floor, cement floor, laying on the floor, and they hogtied him to contain him for his own protection and for everyone else's protection, to de-escalate the situation, to let him calm down. And it took a long time, and he's yelling out mother, blah, blah, and everything else all through I'm sure the fans in the arena could hear, while even during a match, they could hear a lot of the confrontation just behind the velvet curtain there, separating the stands. But it took a while, and then eventually they calmed him down, and Chief helped talk him down, and they talked him down, quieted him, and finally they released him, stood him up, they unhandcuffed him, and they right around the corner from this barricade, a metal barricade, is an exit door. Fans didn't use really. It was just a odd door that went out toward the parking lots. And they walked him to the door, two cops and Strongbow, and they said, "Go straight to LAX, leave, do not attempt to come back, go, you're done, go." And that was the end of that. There were no shotguns pointed to his head, like he said in the thing. I know that looked like good drama for those people on Dark Side of the Ring. Were probably eating that up, and he's a bounty hunter, he's a tough guy, and I understand that, but it didn't happen that way. And I don't know if David remembers it that way. He might, for all he knows, he might remember. Oh, I thought there was two guys with shotguns behind me. They weren't. They were just holding on to each arm. They figured it's all calm down and get out of there. But WrestleMania was just around the corner, literally weeks around the corner. And Chief said There's no way on earth they could let anything happen. His ass was on the line. If anything happened at any of the shows that any of these agents were on with their stars leading up to it, they could not afford to have any embarrassing situations. Whether it was Mr. T or anybody for that matter, they couldn't afford the bad publicity. They'd worked too hard for the good publicity of this.
Now, I've seen a lot of pictures of you in the ring with Macho Man when you were a ring announcer. Did you have many experiences with him over the years?
Yeah, I had a few. I had a lot of respect for Randy. He was a real professional. I really liked him a lot. I know one time I was ring. I'll tell you a wrestling story in a minute, but I was ring announcing in Anaheim one time, and I was facing away from him. I was facing at a certain direction I was always supposed to face. He comes in, I introduce him, and I don't know if it was Sherry with him or if it was Elizabeth, but he comes in and he starts running the ropes real fast, and I'm standing there rigid, not selling for nothing. And he comes up to me, and he whispers in my ear, he says, "What's the matter? You don't sell for me anymore?" And because I was just like, I was always nervous because I was, you're on the line as an announcer. There's no retakes. What you say is gold to these fans, so you can't make any mistakes. So I was like memorizing everything I had in my head, and I took it very, very seriously when I worked for Vince, very seriously. So I didn't jump around and overreact or anything. And so he was just ribbing me that he said, "You don't sell for me anymore." But the real time, the time I remember vividly is San Diego WWF TV tapings, and again. I can't tell you the year, mid to late 80s, I would say. I wrestled Randy, and we were just having a normal match in the ring, even though it was TV. I mean, obviously, I was going to lose. That was fine. I didn't care about that. I'm honored to be in the ring with Randy. He treated me very good. So that night, I go behind him, and we're doing some actually switch off, hold to hold. And I grab he's behind me. I grab his wrist, pull him over in a takedown. He falls down, takes a big bump. I grab an arm bar. I'm working it. We get up, and he gives me a hip toss, and then I gave him a hip toss, and we did a couple moves. And then eventually he pounds the hell out of me, and he comes off the top rope with a big elbow. So we walk back through the dressing room, this long walk back to the TV taping to the dressing room. And the second I walked through this big curtain, I met with Randy, and he goes, "I want to talk to you right now." I was scared to death. Randy could have kicked my ass 10 ways to Sunday, and I'm not a fool. I'm not a shooter. I said, "Okay." And he walked me to this dressing room a few feet away where him and Elizabeth had a private dressing room, separate from all the boys. It was just a little dinky room. That had a sink, maybe a toilet or something in it, just like a walk-in closet type thing. But it was a dressing room. It had the lights on the mirror and all that stuff. And he said, and I walk in, I'm following behind him. And as I get in there, I look over to the right, and there's Elizabeth standing there. She's just staring at me. And there's Randy in front of me and pushes the door shut. So I thought, oh my God, this is where my career ends right now. Randy he's going to kick my ass right now for something. I don't know. Who knows? We don't know where Randy's head's at all the time. He's a wild and crazy guy. I respect him, but he's also wild. And he says, "Hey," sticks his hand out. "I just want to shake your hand and let you know thank you for wrestling me out there and not being intimidated and afraid of me out in the ring." He says, "I love that." I breathed a sigh of relief. I'm almost in tears right now thinking about this. I thought I was going to get my ass kicked, but Randy was just the ultimate professional. Really had a lot of respect for Randy. And I wrestled him in Phoenix here at the Coliseum on a house show in the mid 80s. Somebody didn't show up, but again, I was a standby guy because I was actually living in Phoenix at that time. And somebody didn't show up, and they said, "Hey, Bill, we need you to go in the ring with Savage tonight." I said, "Oh, who cares? That's great." 15-minute match because it was a house show, and had no problems with the guy ever. I had nothing but respect for him. Nothing but respect.
And there was a fan that mentioned they remembered you from the tag team pilot or something starring Piper and Jesse Ventura.
And again, thanks to Vince And Pat Patterson and everybody and Chief having faith in me as a ring announcer in 1990, I believe it was. I showed up at the LA Sports Arena. I was going to be doing the announcing that night. And Strongbow comes up to me and he says, "Hey, Billy," he says, "we have a TV crew down here. They're going to film a TV show and they want you to be the announcer for the show." And I go, "Okay, what's all this involved?" He says, "Well, it's Roddy Piper and Jesse Ventura are going to wrestle Pat Tanaka and it was an Akio Sato, I think. I don't even know. And Mr. Fuji's their manager. He says they're going to work with those guys in a match, a special match. The fans know nothing of this match because Piper is retired and Ventura couldn't wrestle, supposedly. I mean, he had a blood clot in his lung and all this other. He couldn't work anymore. So he said this is an added match. And he says, but this is added onto the show, so we're going to pay you more to do this match. And I was like, I didn't tell him. I could care less. I'd have done it for free. I'm a pro. How am I going to complain ring announcing for Roddy Piper and Jesse Ventura? It's an honor. So they ended up doing this match, and the fans, oh my God, they popped on it when they saw the cameras out there and they saw Piper come out. To them, he's their local boy in LA. He started out there in the 75, whatever it was. So Piper was homegrown to them, and Ventura. So it was like, it was a godsend to the fans that were there to see whatever Hulk Hogan, whoever else was on the show that night, whatever it was, Andre. And there you got Piper and Ventura for the tag team show. And it was the pilot. And so I got paid, I think they paid me $800 in addition to my night's pay, which was far more than I was paid as a ring announcer, a lot more. And they gave me my Screen Actors Guild card. And it was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? And that paid off dividends because it was right after that. Gene LeBell calls me and he says, "Hey, Bill," he says, "I've got a part in a movie for you if you have a Screen Actors Guild card." And if he would have called me 6 weeks before, I would have said, "Sorry, Gene, I don't have it." And he would have said, "Okay, I can't use you. I'll get somebody else." A lot of LA wrestlers had SAG cards because it was like the norm for everybody to be working part-time stuff in Hollywood. So I had mine and I got to work a movie called Alligator 2, The Mutation. Horrible movie, of course. Horrible. But it was with Bill Daly, who was on I Dream of Jeannie as Major Healy, and some other actors. The guy that played Manson in Helter Skelter, I can't think of his name right now, but he was in it. And then the wrestling, it was Count Billy Varga, Alexis Smirnoff, Wildman Jack Armstrong, Professor Tanaka, Chavo Guerrero, and it was my buddies. So I'm on the set at the hotel in LA where Robert Kennedy was killed in 68. I'm at that hotel, the Ambassador Hotel, filming this movie, and I'm in pig heaven. And I took a bump. My scene is I take a bump with Tanaka chops me. He comes out of the ring, and I'm wearing just a sports jacket. I'm just a guy having dinner at a table, and he chops me because he bumps into my table, and I stand up and go, "Hey," chops me. I take a bump backwards over the table behind, a stunt thing. So they had to retake it twice, not because I messed up. It was because the action in the ring didn't work out right to what they were filming. And Gene LeBell walks up and he goes, "Hey, brother," he said, "I'm going to get you a stunt adjustment for that. So you're going to get paid 2 times for that bump." And I go, "Okay." I'd have done it for free. I could care less. I'm having the time of my life. I'm hanging out with my friends. Billy Varga, loved the guy. Smirnoff, all these kind of guys that I was hanging around with. I loved them. Mm-hmm. So I ended up getting paid $1,600 for a day of shooting this one scene in a movie that I would have done for free. I would have paid them probably to have done it. As markish as that sounds, I was in such heaven hanging out with my friends. And now, Gene LeBell, all because of Gene LeBell.
And I was just going to ask you about Gene LeBell. I recently saw him in the Ronda Rousey documentary on Netflix, but he's a legendary character on the LA scene. Could you tell us a little bit about him?
Yeah, I met Gene in the mid-'80s through Red Bastien. Red Bastien got me a part in a movie called Grunt, the wrestling movie.
I love that movie, by the way. That's one of my favorite movies.
I was in a scene. I was part of a trio of guys. Me and Pat Barrett, Irish Pat Barrett, and another guy were wrestling Steve Strong in a trio, 3 against 1. And I end up taking a bump through the ropes and all this stuff. Is how Steve eliminates me. But a lot of the guys were in that. The Destroyer, the Destroyer, and
Billy Graham, I think, had a quick scene.
Yeah, John Tolas.
Adrian Street.
Adrian Street. I was just thinking to say Adrian. So many great workers. Bill Grant, the bodybuilder, was in that. So it was a great thing. So I got to know Gene a little bit through some Hollywood connections. He wasn't around the wrestling at all during that time. He was strictly Hollywood. But I met him through Red Bastien, and Gene would use me on some things. He was going to use me on a show called Misfits of Science. I think it was in '85. And I went down and was casted for a part, signed a contract for it. The part got written out the day before we were shooting. And Gene called and he told me, they wrote your part out. You're canceled off. He says, but you're still getting paid. A few weeks later, I got a check for like $400 or something. I was like, I didn't even do anything. But Gene always looked out for the boys, always. And that's what I loved about Gene. And I love him to this day. He took care of a lot of guys. Whenever I would get Christmas cards from Gene, he'd always say, sorry, nothing's come up. I can get you on, because his connections are so strong in Hollywood. He worked in 1,000 movies. There's many times on TV, I've seen him in like 3 or 4 movies, with Dean Martin to Frank Sinatra and other movies. I just saw 4 for Texas the other day with Frank Sinatra, Dean, and all these guys. And there's Gene, Mike Mazurki. All these guys are in this, So Gene is old school, and he really knows his loyalty to his friends, especially his wrestling friends. He always took care of all of us. Mondo Guerrero was the same way. He took care of Mondo all the time.
And I understand if they ever had problems with a wrestler, they would put him in the ring with Gene.
That's what I've heard. And you can ask Steven Seagal with that on the set of the movie that I don't know if you ever heard the story.
No.
Well, it's a story that's not supposed to be talked about by Gene. If you ask Gene, he is told to deny any knowledge of this story. But they were on a movie together, and Gene was cast as the stunt coordinator for some movie with Steven Seagal, who's a big guy. I never met the guy. Don't know his personality at all. But I guess Seagal went into some kind of a rant with a bunch of stuntmen and a bunch of other people on the set about wrestling being fake. And Gene, I understand, just walked up to him and put him in that dreaded front face lock, leaned back, and Seagal was out like a light on the pavement. Well, needless to say, Seagal had him fired. Gene was fired, and he sued him and won a lawsuit against LeBell for the embarrassment and pain and suffering and all this other. So Gene, part of this lawsuit was Gene was never supposed to discuss this with anybody. So all the boys, of course, when I'd see Gene at Cauliflower Alley Club reunions, we'd all laugh and say, Gene, I can't believe you kicked this guy's ass, this tough guy. And he goes, can't say, not allowed to say. But we knew the story was true. It made the rounds amongst the boys, and we joked around for a long time. There's not a doubt in my mind. LeBell is one of the toughest guys that ever lived, and nothing but respect for Gene LeBell. And you probably saw some recent pictures I posted with me and Boss Rutan.
Yes.
Some pictures, and those were taken at a dojo in I think Woodland Hills. I'm not sure if it was Woodland Hills or North Hollywood. And I went down there with a friend. My friend Kiyaki Sakai is my friend that was with FMW. He was a non-worker. He was a journalist. He was friends with Boss, and he came to LA for a visit to visit Boss. And he contacted me, my friend Kiyaki, and said, or Sakai, he says, hey, do you want to meet Boss Rutan? And I said, yeah. He said, well, we're going to go out and have dinner with Boss Rutan, and then we're going to go to the dojo and watch him train. So we went out and had dinner with Boss Rutan. Tremendous man, nothing but respect for this guy. And then we went to this dojo, and there is Gene LeBell in a pink gi, because only Gene could wear pink and get away with it. Because who's going to discuss that with Gene? Like, yeah. You're not a man wearing pink. Oh my God. So there's Gene. I should have taken 1,000 pictures that night, but I think I was just so in awe of being around Boss Rutan. I was just so impressed with the guy, but we hung around, and there was another MMA guy there. I cannot think of his name to save my life. I think him and Boss were partners on something. I wasn't so into MMA at that time, but of course I know who Boss was. But very impressed. But there was Gene doing his thing, and he was still training into his 70s and 80s, and he's still alive. I think he's 89 now. Um, the guy is just great. Guy is just a fantastic man. Nothing but tremendous props go out to Gene LeBell.
I'm impressed that you had the foresight to take so many pictures over the course of the years. Not many people documented their lives as much as you did.
And believe me, I took a lot of heat for that. A lot of my friends, Tim Patterson, a lot of the guys I travel with, they said, "Oh my God, there's Bill pulling his camera out again." But every one of those guys, including superstar Billy Graham, say, "Brother, I can't believe I didn't do the same thing you did." And I kick myself for not doing that. And I kick myself for not taking pictures. I was around Ray Stevens 100 times, working for WWF, I was doing ring announcing for the Ladies Professional Wrestling Association in 1990 and 91 in Laughlin, Nevada. And Ray would come down there and hang out with Joe Pedicino and Jim Cornette and different people, only a few guys, it's mostly all women, but he would come down there and hang out, and I would get Ray drunk. I'd be buying him drinks all night long. And I just love Ray. And I didn't take any pictures with Ray ever. Kicked myself 1,000 times. Gorilla Monsoon. So many of these guys I was around. Arnold Skolin. And you can't get it back. They're gone. I was around Buddy Rogers at CAC. I said, "Oh, there's Buddy over there. God, what a legend. I'll get a picture later." He leaves. A few weeks later, he's dead. You can't get those memories back. Leah Maivia, all the times I worked for her, I saved every letter she ever wrote me. Oh, Mama Leah Maivia says, "Bill, I'd love you to come to the island. I'm so sorry I cannot pay you your full guarantee. I'm so sorry. I'll make it up to you next trip, next trip, next trip." But I loved working for Leah, and I never took pictures with her, but I had nothing but respect for her. And so many guys like that, I dropped the ball. But I'm thankful I did as many as I did do. I wish I had done 1,000 more, easily 1,000 more.
Did you ever get a picture with Jesse Ventura?
Oh, yeah, several times. Yeah, I got a few. I just posted one the other day. He's actually wearing his boa on one picture. It was at the LA Sports Arena. I got a couple more, 2 or 3 more. And of course, I went to his book. He had his book, I Ain't Got Time to Bleed or whatever. I went to a book signing he had at the Nixon Library in Yorba Linda, California, many, many years ago, probably 20 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever it was. And of course, Jesse didn't remember me. I was like, "I don't expect you to remember me, brother." I guess those were the halcyon days where you just don't remember everybody that you worked with along the road. And I know I work with a lot of people, and sometimes I get messages from people, "Hey, brother, remember when we worked that match?" And I'm like, "No, don't remember you. Sorry." I guess you have to make an impact with people before they get to remember you and everything. And
And what about Roddy Piper?
Roddy I worked in a movie, Body Slam, with Roddy. Tell you a couple Roddy Piper stories. Absolutely.
That's a good movie, by the way. If anyone hasn't seen it, they should look it up.
Yeah, I have Roddy. He is one of the other guys I told you on a handful that I could not stop crying when Roddy passed away. The most sincerest, dearest, sweetest man I've ever known. Goes right up there with Jimmy Snuka and a few others that I could say on top of one hand, I could say that are above and beyond everybody. And there's Roddy Piper, but we're Hal Needham, one of the famous stuntmen and directors that directed Smokey and the Bandit movies in the 70s. Well, this is in 1985-ish, I want to say, that Body Slam came out. So Red Bastien, once again, my dear friend Red Bastien, calls me and says, "Bill, I need you to go to this town. It's called Rubidoux, California. It's just a suburb of LA, about 50 miles out." Those are all suburbs of LA. When you're 50 miles, it's all just a little suburb, runs right into the other. He says, "They're shooting a movie called Body Slam, and I got a part for you." He says, "I'm sure we'll cast you in something, referee, ring announcing, wrestling, whatever, but I want you a part of it. They're using me as a technical advisor, so I'll get you involved. And I said, fine, Red, whatever you say is gold to me. So I went down with my partner, Tim Patterson, and they had a trailer set up outside of this little nightclub, and went in and talked to Piper. And I had known Roddy through the early years of the expansion of working for Vince. And he tells me, he says, I've got my choice of 2 teams, and I can only choose one team to use. Either you and this other big tall guy, this Tim Patterson. I'll use you, or I got these other guys, Pistol Pete and Buddha Khan, 2 other local wrestlers in LA. He says, I know them guys, and I don't want to work with them if I can help it. He said, I'd rather choose you guys. And I said, Roddy, whatever you want's good for me. So he tells Needham, these are the guys I'm going to use for this scene. And he said, Hal Needham says, cool. Roddy treated this movie as a total shoot to outsiders. 100% shoot. No work, nothing. He says, whatever we do in the ring, you sell it 100%. Well, in this scene, in the way it's hard. I think I have to go back and actually watch it myself. It's kind of like a fading scene of him and Fatu are like in a dressing room, remembering back on all their matches that they've had to let up to something in the movie. I haven't watched it in 20 years, honestly. And they're remembering back on highlights of matches. And I'm part of a highlight scene, fading in and out of the screen, myself and Tim Patterson. And in the actual match, I think like Fatu throws Patterson against the ropes and drop kicks him, and he takes a bump through the ropes, and then he does a dive out or something. And then I come in and Piper does something to me, but I'm on the mat. He gets up on like the top rope or middle rope, comes down with a knee drop on me, and I'm selling that. And then he hooks me in a figure 4. And I'm like, yeah, I give. And that kind of a thing. But forgot to tell you one important thing. The scene, right before that scene was shot, he tells Hal Needham, stands right in the ring. This is why I'm so proud of Roddy. It's unheard of nowadays, but he told Needham in front of the whole crew and in front of the audience that they had, he says, this is a 1-take deal. Get it straight. One time this match is going to happen. Only one. This is no repeat. This is serious stuff. My guys, these guys, their lives are on the line in this match. He says, so you got a camera over there. You got a camera over there. You got a camera back there. You got this camera by the ring here. He says, get it right, because it's 1 take only. And that's what it was. It was 1 take. We did this scene. I got paid a few $100s for it. I don't even remember now. Could care less. I probably would have done it for free. But Roddy, that was Roddy's mentality. When I got out of the ring, I was selling this figure 4 to everybody in this building. There was maybe 40, 50 production people and a bunch of fans or hired people were around the ring for this match. And singer Frankie Valli from the Four Seasons was there, because in this movie there was some band there that he was sponsoring or something. He was involved production wise with this band that they used in the movie. So Frankie Valli is standing off to the side, and I walk up to him. Of course, me being the mark I am, I wanted a picture with Frankie Valli. So I walk up to Frankie and introduce myself, and I'm limping. And he goes, man, he says, you chose a tough way to earn a living. And I go, yeah, well, I can't sing. I wish I could sing like you, my friend. I can't do that. I was big. I wasn't as big as I am now, but I'm 6'2". I was about 225 pounds. I said, it's what I do for a living. I've done it for 10 years now. And I ended up taking a nice picture with Frankie Valli. I took that opportunity to take a picture with Frankie Valli. But that was one of Roddy's memories I have with him. And the last time I saw Roddy was in 2011 at a fan convention in Los Angeles that I drove over, myself and Billy Graham. We went over from Phoenix here to LA for this convention. I can't remember what Wrestle Reunion something or whatever it was, Wrestle Reunion 5 or 2 or something in Los Angeles. A lot of great guys were there, Jimmy Hart and Roddy was there. And Roddy had a line of people, 150 people long, to get his autograph and take pictures with. And I came in through this backside of the line. And as soon as Roddy saw me, just stopped everything he was doing. He came over, gave me a big hug, and he whispers in my ear. He says, brother, dreams do come true. And I've had people ask me 1,000 times, because I've repeated this, what did he mean by that? And I said, you know what? I don't even care what he meant. It doesn't matter. It's your interpretation of what he meant. He was living life and he was happy, and he made me happy every time I was ever around him. And I just absolutely loved Piper. He was just the sweetest guy. And that there's not enough words to describe Roddy Piper. And I cried like a little tiny baby. Cried as much for him as when my mom died.
And how did you end up becoming such good friends with Billy Graham? I know you both live in Phoenix now.
Yeah, well, I'd known Billy for many years through his work with Vince. When he was doing commentating for a cable channel in LA for some shows at the LA Sports Arena in '88, they called it there the Z channel. I don't, this is a primitive cable back in those days, but we did a series of house shows where they filmed the entire show, and I'm the ring announcer, and the commentators are a various assortment of either Billy Graham and Bobby Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon, or Monsoon, Jesse Ventura, and Rod Trongard, different people, and Billy was there most of the time. And so I got to know Billy just a little bit there. But where our relationship escalated was in '96. In January of '96, I was running a wrestling school in San Bernardino, California with Jesse Hernandez. We had the school called the School of Hard Knocks. And Billy calls me one day and he says, hey, he says, I got your phone number from Dave Meltzer. And he says, which everybody knows, Dave Meltzer is the god of journalism in wrestling. And he says, so Dave gave me your number and I want to come by your school and talk to you. Superstar Billy Graham, you're welcome anytime to come by our school. Always makes an impression with the boys in the school. When you have a celebrity come by, a big name, when we had Matt Bourne or Mondo Guerrero or Chris Jericho or Godfather and different people come by through the years, the boys eat that up. It's like, you really do know these guys. Yeah, of course we know these guys. We've been on the road with these guys. So anyway, Billy comes by and he goes, I am looking at producing a show in Phoenix at a church called First Assembly of God, Phoenix First Assembly of God, in a couple months from now. And he says, what I'm looking for in my vision here, so I'm going to do an illustrated drama and tell my life story in a drama involving the Lord, involving one of the great pastors of the United States, his name is Pastor Tommy Barnett. He's a visionary pastor. He likes to do these dramas, illustrated sermons, and bring in horses and camels and crazy things on his stage. And this church is the most beautiful church. It seats like 5,000 people. It's a 3-tier, huge mecca of a church. It's like a sports arena church. And he says, I want to do a match. I need a ring. I need a ring announcer. I need a referee. And more important than any of that, I need somebody to wrestle Jake the Snake Roberts. He says, can you help me with that? I said, I've wrestled Jake probably 10 times at least. He says, you're not afraid of snakes? I said, absolutely not. I don't know why I'm not, but I'm not. And I said, I've had that snake pulled down through my groin and everything else, with Jake screwing around in the ring at TV tapings and him catching heat when he got back, with him pulling the snake through my tights like this, like a seesaw.
Oh,
it was quite embarrassing. And I've wrestled Jake many, many times. I have no problem. I get along great with Jake. At that time, and I'll tell you this as a shoot, Jake was clean, sober, and 1,000% for the Lord. He was a strict Christian at the time. And so we ended up going to Phoenix. Again, it was just another booking for me. I was not necessarily a Christian. I was not a real sinning person, but I certainly was not a clean living person. And there we are in Phoenix, and rehearsed a scene with Jake Roberts. And I realized during the rehearsal, we went in a day early, set the ring up. They told us we're expecting anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people to show up. He said, there's going to be an overflow where they're going to set up big screens outside of the huge building. And we're going to have an overflow crowd of thousands and thousands and thousands. There's no pay involved. I mean, they didn't get paid. The fans didn't have to buy a ticket, is what I'm saying. They paid me. They paid Jesse for his ring and referee, and they paid me a few $100s to wrestle Jake, all this other. But again, I went into this as just another gig for me. I don't care if it's a church, a bar, an arena. It makes no difference. I'm a professional wrestler. I'll wrestle anywhere you tell me to wrestle. Wrestle outside in the ground if that's what you want. You pay me, I'll do it. So I went in and I watched Billy rehearse his scene with a woman playing his wife, Valerie, an actress. And I watched him go through this music. Devin, have you ever seen the Empty Ring drama, this illustrated drama video? Have you ever seen this?
No, he wants to find the video, Billy, from what I understand. He says he hasn't seen it for sure.
I have copies of it.
Okay.
Somehow I'll get this to
I
you.
would like to post that video, but I don't know who owns the copyright on it.
Well, maybe it's who owns the copy of it right now.
Yeah.
I have it. We'll talk about that. Okay. But I have copies of it. And but anyway, I wrestled. I do this rehearsal, and that night after this rehearsal, I'm sitting in the outer lobby of this huge church. There was only a few people revolving the church there, and they were getting cameras kind of set up for big production for them. And I'm sitting there and just bawling my eyes out by myself. I'm just in tears. My hands in my head, or head in my hands, I should say. And Billy and Valerie come walking by, and Billy says, "What's wrong, brother?" And I says, "Billy, I don't know." I says, "I can't stop crying." And he says, "Brother, this is the Holy Spirit speaking to you and your heart." And he says, "It's time for you to change your life." And no one's ever talked to me like that in my whole life. This was in 96. I was 40 years old. Yeah, 40 years old. And I said, "What? Holy Spirit? I mean, a church?" This was something all new to me. Well, the next night we do this show, sold out. I mean, packed. Couldn't put another people in, 3 tiers up, far around. I have some photos. I'll post some photos of this event I took, or some other people took, of this entire event, and some pictures.
I'll put them up over the screen.
Yeah, and it was quite something. I'd never been around in my life. And I wrestled Jake. I come down these long, big stairwell to I don't even know if it was Holding Out for a Hero, I think, song, and, good baby face entrance. I'm waving the American flag and all this other stuff. Jake's in the ring. Come down and wrestle Jake. And at the end of this match, when Jake, after he puts a stake on me, or he pins me, he's laying across me and he goes, "Brother, I love you." And we're both in tears, just laying there. There I am with Jake Roberts covering me. And I never thought I'd be having Jake on top of me saying, "I love you too, brother." And, but it's something that I'll never forget for as long as I live. And Billy was the cause of this, that my relationship with Jake and my further relationship with Billy. And we became tighter than tight from 96 on. And I ended up moving back here in 2005 to Phoenix. So the last 15 years, I spent as much time around Billy. He's going to be 76 next month on June 6th. So I spend as much time with him as I can when I can. But this pandemic has changed everything right now. I haven't seen Billy so much lately. But we were having lunch together for 4, 5, 6 weeks in a row every week until leading up to this pandemic. And but Billy is a guy you can easily have a love-hate relationship with. He's very controversial, as you know, and I sometimes disagree with some things he's said or done, but I always respect him. And we have had lunches where we're in a restaurant full of people and we just sit there and cry because we start talking about Lou Albano or Bobby the Brain Heenan and people that we knew and worked with and spent time with. And it rubs Billy in a sensitive way, and we just both break down. And that's why I love our lunches. They're 2 or 3 hours long, and we shoot the crap about any subject imaginable. You've come up, everybody's come up in conversation, and they're just great. And but that's kind of where things started from in 96 with Billy. And he is my best friend when I've had back surgery, after I had back problems. He's the first one that shows up in the hospital to help me and to stand. He stood with me through the entire time I was at this emergency room in the hospital. The only person in Phoenix that showed up. Billy's standing there, and he's got every reason in the world not to be there for all his ailments. And when I had eye surgery, I've had 5 eye surgeries over the couple years ago with torn retinas in both eyes. Billy was the guy there, sat with me through my surgeries out in the lobby and drove me back to his place after the surgeries and let the things, all the medicines die down in my eyes so I could drive home. But Billy was the guy I can always count on unconditionally. He's the man. So I can't help but always love Billy, and God bless him.
And I think some people don't realize that sometimes he just says stuff to get that heel reaction to stir things up, and people take him too seriously.
Yeah, and nobody can stir things up like Billy. And I don't know. We've had our disagreements. I mean, lightly and politely disagreements in restaurants, and we've talked about Bob Backlund. I understand what went down with Backlund in 78 and all this other, but at the same time, in 78, not now, but I understood and it makes sense why they did their change, and they were going in another direction. And Bob had the credentials as an amateur wrestler and as a hell of a worker. When I saw him, I worked a lot of shows in 83 and 84 with him. That guy had endurance like no wrestler I've ever seen in my life. He would stand in the dressing room and do those bench step up things or chair step up things where he'd step up, step down, step up with the other foot, step down. He would do those for an hour, even 2 hours before he even went to the ring, and then go out there and spend an hour in the ring and come back and not even breathing heavy. I was breathing heavy as a fan watching him. I was breathing heavy. And there he is, come back like, okay, now what? I'm done. And I'm not even breathing heavy. 3 hours of nothing but endurance. And he blew Buddy Rose up one time in the ring so bad. Buddy, I think, poor Buddy, I think he spent a month trying to catch his breath. I saw that in San Diego. I vividly recall it. In fact, I think I just posted that lineup just yesterday or last.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was Buddy Rose against Bob Backlund. That was the night they went an hour. It was an hour Broadway, and it was nothing to Backlund. That was just another day at work. But you tell me, Buddy didn't have that hard. Buddy wasn't as heavy as he became. Obviously, he was probably only about 240 then or something. He was really slimmed down, but he was suffering when he came back to the dressing room. If anybody needed oxygen, it was Buddy that night. I'll never forget it. But
now, I don't know how you had time to do all this, but at what point did you start actually training wrestlers on top of everything else?
Okay, how that happened was in 1985. I was living here in Phoenix and I was married, but I was getting ready pretty much to go through a divorce. And Red was my best friend. Red Bastien was my best friend. And Red was working as a road agent for WWF. And I had told him when I left LA and I moved to Phoenix, I says, I could still make all my bookings for LA, Fresno, San Diego, because I was doing refereeing and ring crew and all this. I said, I could still make all my bookings. Don't worry about nothing. I don't want to be discounted because I'm living in Phoenix. I made that trip to LA 150, 200 times in my life, 5 hours over. It's no big deal to me. I still do it now to visit my son over in Palm Springs. So I said, it's nothing to me now, nothing to me then. So I says, don't discount me on bookings. And he said, no, don't worry about nothing. But anyway, I was going through a divorce and I called Red in 85. Summer of 85. And I says, hey, Red, I'm moving back to Los Angeles. I'm done in Phoenix. I can't take this anymore. I was working some odd indies in Phoenix and it was worthless. It was bad. And I was supplementing with WWF, my income. And he says, well, do you have a place to stay when you come back here? And I says, no, I don't. I said, you're the first person I'm literally calling because you're the most important person. You're my first contact saying I'm coming back. And he says, I have a huge apartment that I rented in Sepulveda, which is a suburb of Los Angeles. And he says, I have a extra bed in the apartment. You're more than welcome to room with me. I says, Red, you're a lifesaver. That takes a big load off of me. I didn't know what to do. This is in the era before computers and cell phones. All these things that we communicate and take advantage of now that we didn't have that to like look up apartments or look up phone numbers or look up this contact to go places. It was primitive in those days, it was just the way the world was. And so Red says, come on back. So I drove back over to LA, went to Red. And one night I had gone out to dinner with Red and he says, Billy, he says, I got a proposition for you. He says, I met a man named Rick Bassman, and he says, I am going to kind of go and do something I haven't done before, but I'm going to open up a wrestling school. And he says, Rick Bassman has given me a very large check. And he pulls a check out of his wallet and shows it to me. And I don't know if Rick would appreciate me talking about it, but I won't say the amount. It was very substantial. My eyes widened. And he says, Rick Bassman has 4 guys he wants to book as a team called Power Team USA. And I have 2 other guys that were sent to me that I'm going to train. So that's 6 big guys. He says, look, I can't get in the ring with these guys like I could have years before. Red had hip surgery. He was involved in a very serious car accident with Hercules Cortez. Many years before, he broke his hips. It was horrendous. Hercules Cortez passed away in this car accident. Red was really never the same, even though he wrestled after that. He was never the same. But here's Red at, I don't even know what he was, maybe 50 years old then, whatever he was. And he just said, I can't get in the ring and tumble with these big guys. Can't do it. He says, I can get in and push off as long as I don't have to take a bump or anything sudden to jerk my hips out of alignment or anything. I can't do it. So he says, I need you. I was 29 years old. I was in whatever my prime was. I was there in 85. And he says, I need you to be my man, to go in, show these guys the ropes, take the bumps for these guys, get to know them, be friends with them, and work their asses off. I says, Red, whatever you need. And Red says, there's going to be no money involved, but what I am going to give you is a place to stay. So you got a good solid roof over your head. And I'll buy you dinner whenever I can. And he says, we'll enjoy life. Well, again, wrestling's all I've known at that point in 85. I said, Red, whatever you want, brother. Red was my mentor. Red was like the way I look at Billy or Roddy Piper or Jimmy Snuka. What their word is gold to me. And whatever they wanted from me, I would give them my heart. I'd give them anything. So I said, Red, whatever you need. So Red rented a racquetball court out of a Nautilus Aerobics Plus gym in Northridge, California. This would have probably been around, I don't know, June or maybe July of 85. He had a ring built by Mike Sharp, Iron Mike Sharp's father, Mike Sharp Sr., who was part of Mike and Ben Sharp, famous tag team in the 50s and 60s, whatever. Mike Sharp was long retired, living in LA, and he built rings. Well, he built a very hard-ass ring, like a 15 or I don't even know if it was 16 feet, maybe like a 15 odd-shaped ring, 15 foot that would fit on this racquetball court with plenty of room to be able to still walk around the ring. And, of course, the echo in the racquetball court was horrible. But Red had worked a deal out with the gym to allow him to do this. I think he'd pay the owner a few bucks or the manager on the side, and they would just close this one racquetball court down permanently for a few months for Red to run what he called his training camp. So I go into the camp and I meet Jim Hellwig, Steve Borden, Mark Miller, Garland Donahoe, Dave Sheldon, and Steve DeSalvo. And I'm looking at these guys, and I'm the smallest amongst them all. I was 225 pounds probably. I was at my thinnest. I still hadn't recovered from my diet of working for Mike LeBell when I was working to death. Because those days I was actually living in my car at some points. That's how rough things got working for Mike. No disrespect to Mike because he was doing all he could for me, but that's just the way it was. The houses were down, no money, and I was without a place to stay. So I lived hard, and I understand that. So Red was giving me this good opportunity, and so we worked with these guys. And I know what your questions are because I saw some of the fans asking about, was Warrior hard to work with? Was all this other? I can tell you the deal with that was Red was setting up this camp to train these guys, like a 3-month camp to run 6 days a week, anywhere from 4 to 6 hours a day. Very intense. It was no pansy, like 2 hours, hook up, drop down, take them down, throw them around. It wasn't anything. It was like body slams, suplexes. It was very intense. I was the guinea pig. I learned after training these guys and after I abused my body for a couple months that I'll never again do this and allow 6 guys, especially Dave Sheldon, who was 6'7". I'll never allow these kind of guys to throw me around. So they got the feel of going up light, and they got the feel of what a pro would feel like on the receiving end. I let them do things to themselves and let them feel like what a stiff guy is going to feel like, and understand that aspect of it, because I was giving them too much. I was giving them my body. So yeah, I went over like Ray Stevens would go over on with somebody. I was taking bumps. I look like $1 million to them. It's like, wow, this is easy. Well, I had to change things around to make them understand it's not going to be like that. It's going to be tough guys in the ring, big, thick guys. They're all big guys. So Warrior was not tough to deal with in those days. Jim Hellwig. Obviously, we didn't call him Sting and Warrior in those days. Jim was not tough to deal with. He was a very, very, very friendly, gracious guy, willing to learn anything and everything pushed toward him. Rick Bassman provided a house for those 4 guys, for Garland Donahoe, Mark Miller, who you don't hear much about ever again, and Jim and Steve. Those 4 were staying in a house. Jim had his wife, I think her name was Sherry, staying with him in the house too, which caused a little heat because there he is with the woman. The other guys don't have anybody. They're all in this house. And so Jim was a little more content at night, where the other guys were getting a little antsy. And so Rick provided food for him. He would bring in groceries, as much protein as they could get for these big bodybuilder kind of guys. But I'll tell you, before I get back to training, I want to tell you a story that I think I've only told about one time. I think you'll get a kick out of this. I was with Steve Borden on a NWA show, let me think, 80, 87, 88, I don't know. And it was at the Inglewood Forum, the Forum in Inglewood. Steve came in. It was a WCW show. Dusty Rhodes was there, a bunch of guys, the Road Warriors. Rick Rude, I think, I don't even know. It was a who's who of the business in the dressing room. I went in to say hello to Steve because I'm obviously quite proud of him at that point. He had a couple years earlier, he had been with me in the school. And I was like, hey, that's my boy. I'm his trainer, blah, blah, blah. Steve was hi-hatting me pretty good. Just like, hey, Billy. It's like, whoa, I don't even get a hug and nothing. Where's my response? You're big time, brother. And I'm like still small time. But I sure as hell busted my ass to help you go where you are. I'm not totally responsible, of course, but I help put you where you are, and you're going to treat me like another fan in the audience? I was a little pissed off. So Steve goes around to the mirror in the bathroom, and Dusty's in there. He's shaving. 2 mirrors and sinks. Dusty's shaving. Steve's over there. And I brought up something that happened to him in 85, and I embarrassed the shit out of him. And I'll tell you the story. I went by, and this is a story I told Steve to remind him. I was at their house during our training. It was only about 2 miles from where we had the school, and I lived a couple miles further on with Red. So on some of my nights off, or a night off from training or whatever, I would stop by the house, hang out with the guys, the 4 guys. We were all friends, I'd hang out and watch TV, shoot the crap with them. And one night I stop over, and there's Garland and Mark Miller, and I says, "Where's Steve and Jim?" And they said they went out grocery shopping and haven't come back. They should be back any minute. So I'm sitting there watching TV, and about an hour later, this grocery store was only about a quarter of a mile away. I said, where are these guys? All of a sudden, front door comes barging in, and it's Steve. And I says, what is going on? And he's panting. I mean, he looked like he just run a marathon. I said, what is going on? He says, me and Jim were shoplifting out of a grocery store. We were walking down this aisle drinking a gallon of milk each, and we were eating bananas, just peeling them, plowing them in our mouths, and we were throwing the thing down, and we're eating, drinking protein, getting as much food, we're eating some bologna and all this stuff. He says, what are you guys? You're crazy. And I said, where's Jim? He says, I don't know. He says, the cops are after him. He says, cop cars were chasing us down streets with lights and everything, and shining it on these alleys where we were hiding. I said, you guys are insane. So about 15, 20 minutes later, Jim Hellwig comes running in the door the same way. just like he did his Warrior entrance. That's how
Yeah.
he put it in the house, minus the music and minus the ropes. And he comes in and he's the same thing. I said, Jim, what's going on? He said, brother, the cops are after us. He says, I don't think they saw where we live here, where we're at. He says, you guys are insane. And I said, what happened, Jim? He says, all I know is security chased us out of the store. They called the cops on us in the store. Cops started coming, following us down alleys, but we're so big, they were a little intimidated even. And he says, at one point, he says, I was hiding in an alley behind some trash cans. And he says, my leg was hanging out in the alley. I couldn't fit behind this can. He says, my calf was so big. He says, I could see a light shining on my leg. And he says, I think whoever it was didn't even want to mess with me. They just left it alone. And they walked off. So anyway, the story is that's their story of trying to survive in LA. They were just green guys, just trying to make it. So I reminded Steve, remember your days, Steve, when you had to steal out of grocery stores to survive in this business? I was there. I saw it. And after that, Steve turns around and gives me a big hug. Billy, I remember, brother. It's good to see you. He was all friendly and all nice. And I'm not trying to say this to embarrass Steve. We all done it. I've done it. I've done it in my life. I'm not, it's just part of life sometimes. I'm not saying this to embarrass Steve and the late Jim Hellwig at all. I'm just saying these are things that happen. Sometimes you have to remind people of their roots and where they started from. And don't start hi-hatting everybody like you were better and everything else. We've all been there. You're no different. Yeah, you're making $1 million a year, $500,000 a year at the time, whatever it was. And I'm probably making a couple thousand a month on my indie circuit. But don't sell me that short. And after that, Steve treated me a lot different. A couple of times afterwards, I saw Steve. I did the ring announcing for the World Peace Festival in '96 at the Los Angeles Sports Arena, and that was really a who's who of the business. Inoki and Sagaguchi came in, guys from Mexico, Bam Bam Bigelow, Jericho, Benoit, the Giant, became Big Show. All those guys were on the show, and Lex Luger was on it. And I was sharing a dressing room with Sting, and Lex Luger came in, and Luger didn't know me. And I was I was putting a tuxedo on. So to him, I was a mark. And Luger goes, oh, and he stuck his head in with his bag in his hand. And then he started to walk out. Sting goes, no, come in. This is Billy. He's my trainer. Come on in. And Luger came in, shook hands with me, and still walked out. I never forgave Lex for that either, because he looked at it like, oh, I can't be myself around Steve with this guy in the room, like I'm some foreign part of the business. And it's like, you know what? That's fine. So then another show at the Olympic Auditorium, WCW was there with Sting on it. And the Steiners and him were sharing a dressing room, and he did the same thing. He brought me in. He said, hey, Rick, Scott, this is Bill Anderson. This is my guy that trained me and broke me in. They weren't overly friendly, but that's just the way they are. And I appreciated Steve being respectful. That's all I ask. I don't say, hey, brother, you got an extra 1,000 to give. I don't just want a handshake and a hug. That's all. Recognition a little bit. Remember your roots. That's all. But that's a little bit sidetracked from the training. But I wanted to tell you that story. I had to remind Steve, you're a human being and you have faults just like all of us. And just because you're making big money, don't mean shit.
How was the Warrior from that perspective?
He was always 1,000% with me, always greeting me with Billy, big hugs. You probably saw the pictures I posted of him with my son. My son is literally a couple months old, and he's taking pictures kissing my son. Jim was fantastic. Jim would say when he was champion and working shows, no matter what arena, he'd say, Billy, you have any of your boys from your school here? And I go, yeah, I got a couple guys. They're here as extras or TV tapings or whatever. He says, hey, if you want me to take pictures with them, anything you want, bring them on in. And he'd throw the belt on their shoulder like he did with me, throw the belt on, take pictures, and he'd be nothing but first class. And he'd say, listen to Billy. He'll steer you right. Do whatever Billy tells you, and he's your guy. And always give good words of advice to the boys, my students. Always first class. Never, ever, ever high-hatted me and like, I don't have time for this shit. It was always like, Billy, thank you. It's nice to see you again. Always.
There was a story in Bret Hart's book that I found a little hard to believe, that the Warrior supposedly kayfabed a a Make-A-Wish kid, knowing the Warrior, could you imagine him refusing to see a Make-A-Wish kid?
I honestly can't. I mean, I don't know. I've never heard that story, but I can tell you, of all things with Jim and kids and that sort of thing, I can't believe it would happen. I mean, if it did, it did, but I certainly find it very, very, very hard to believe. I saw Jim just like I saw Hulk Hogan, and for that part, for that much, for that respect, even Andre the Giant, that really never turned down autographs with people, no matter how inconvenient it was. God knows, we've all been there, carrying your bag, you're tired, you've even left the ring after you juiced, and you're all bloody, and fans are still sticking stuff out for you to sign, and you feel guilty, but at the same time, you got business to do, but you still try you were more of a heel probably. I was a baby face a lot, but I always felt obligated. Even at the very least, I'd say, can you wait till I get done in the locker room and clean up? I would always do that, but I would always sign autographs and everything. I always felt obligated, but I find it hard to believe Jim would do that. Honestly, it's not the style.
Me too. There's a few other things in that book that's a little questionable. I just wanted a few fans always bring that up, so I just wanted your opinion on it. Was there any point in their training where you thought that they might actually give up and not finish the training?
No, but I can tell you something I've never told on an interview here, and I'll get to it. But I can tell you that it's without a doubt, and I'd be a fool to say it otherwise. Obviously, Steve Borden had the most athletic ability of these six guys. You could see the spring in his feet, eventually when he would do that big jump into the corner and all. Oh, I saw all that. But I'm from another era. I never envisioned Rick Bassman's portrayal of four guys going into a territory as a team. We're lucky to have had at that time the trios of the Road Warriors with Paul Ellering, or trios of the Freebirds. Those were rare to have three guys in a territory, like come in for main events. Promoters couldn't afford it. It was just business. So to have four guys as a vision, I personally didn't see it. And I admire Rick. He was a visionary. Rick was trying to do something different, obviously thinking outside the box for the business. And I appreciate that. At the time, I didn't see it coming, personally. And I don't know if Red did or not. Red had dollar signs. Red was business. Red was all business. And but where I'm going with this story is, because I saw somebody asked, how did they become the Blade Runners and all this stuff? If you want me to tell that part of the story, I could kind of lead to that.
Sure.
Okay. So what ended up happening after about 3 months, maybe even a little less than 3 months, I get a phone call. I was at Red's. I get a phone call from Jim Hellwig, and he says, hey, Billy, he says, can you meet me and Steve down at Gold's Gym in Venice, like today, or it was tomorrow, whatever it was, 35 years ago. It's hard to remember the exact scenario, but he says, can you meet us at Gold's Gym? We want to talk to you. And I says, yeah, whatever you want, Jim. So I met them at the time that they specified, and we were outside of Gold's Gym in the parking lot. And Jim says, we have some ideas that we've run by each other, and we want to talk to you about it. And we want your perspective, because you are the only guy that has no money interest in us. And we trust you. I built up a friendship with these guys. They knew me. They knew I wasn't going to bullshit them or anything. He says, we trust your judgment, and you have no vested interest financially in us, one way or the other, to lead us astray. He says, but we have some offers and we have some thoughts going on. I says, well, tell me what you got going on. He says, well, first of all, us two guys don't think Mark and Garland are going to cut it. And I go, as a team, as a four-man team. And I said, okay, I'm with you on that. I could see that they were just going through the motions of training. Nice guys, but they did not have that. I don't know how to describe it. It's the it factor, the eye of the tiger, if you want to say that. They didn't have it. Jim and Steve had it. They were vested to go further in this business. So they said, we want to break off from this four-man concept. Not going to work. We haven't talked to Rick Bassman about this. And sorry, Rick, I mean, no disrespect to Rick Bassman, who I know is going to watch this, and I'm very sorry, but this is the way it went down. And he says, but we talked to Red slightly about this, and Red said, I can get you booked up in Calgary for Stu Hart. He says, but here's the deal. He says, if you go up to Calgary, he says, I want to say 15%. I think it was 15% of your next 5 years' earnings. And I can get you booked up for Stu as a team right now. This was like, I believe, September of 85. And he says, we have another idea. He says, Steve and Jim both said, we have taken pictures as a team, and we had pictures that Rick had taken of different members of the team together, twosomes. And we sent pictures to Jerry Lawler in Memphis. So he says, if you were us, what would you do? I said, well, me being an independent kind of guy, don't really like to be told what to do too much. Never signed a contract, which is probably detrimental to my career too. I said, I wouldn't do what Red said. I wouldn't want to go up to Calgary in the winter and make those long.
It was bad there too to begin with.
Yeah. And he says, I wouldn't want to go up to the snow country in Calgary in the winter. I think that'd be like hell on earth. And it's no disrespect to Stu and the boys. Everyone knows the dungeon and the respect for the Hart family. That goes without saying in the business. No disrespect to Red or to them. But I said, I had worked in Tennessee in 75, 10 years before. I said, I was Bill Colt down there. I was wrestling 7 days a week, 3 times on Saturdays. We'd work Huntsville TV, Birmingham TV in the afternoon on a Saturday afternoon, and then go to Chattanooga in this Saturday night show. I said, you will get nothing but experience down there. Your pay might be crap, but your experience is what you need, because any trainer worth his weight in gold knows you can only teach somebody so much in a ring. It's what you learn in front of a paying crowd to get the response that you need. You need fan response, not just our approval. Mine or Red Bastien standing down on the floor. Hey, that looks good. That looks good. It's not the same as when you do it in front of a crowd. I had students freeze up at WWF TV tapings. I had a guy, Vince McMahon. I had this bodybuilder guy, freeze up working with Steve Lombardi. He was getting a tryout. Froze. Lombardi ate him up, spit him out, and that was the end of that. But Vince said, I want to see what this guy's got. He froze. He knew how to work. He froze in the ring, and Selland Arena in Fresno, froze in front of like 10,000 fans. Couldn't do shit. Nothing. Froze up. So I know what that's like. I said, this is what you guys need. Steve, Jim, you guys need experience. We've taught you what we can teach. Sure, we could keep going on and on. Taught them drop kicks. They all knew how to drop kick. They all knew how monkey flips. They know how to do all the stuff you never saw Jim Hellwig do. Believe me, to all you naysayers, he knew wrestling holds. He knew them, but he didn't have to do them. He was told, run to the ring. You're a unique gimmick. You're a unique person. Excite the fans. He wasn't about to go out there and do Dynamite Kid type moves or Jannetty and Michaels moves, or act like the Rockers, or the Midnight Express or the Midnight Rockers or any other team, the Rock and Roll Express. He wasn't going to go out there and act like that. He was a power kind of guy, and that's what Vince wanted out of him, and that's exactly what he delivered. And he busted his ass doing that gimmick. But that is where they got their start, and they went down. They ended up forgetting what Red said, forgetting Rick Bassman. And I don't know if there was a contract involved with Rick and all that. It was none of my business. I didn't understand or deal with that. I was giving him straight, honest advice, wrestler to wrestler, go to Tennessee. And that's exactly what they did. And I guess they became Rock and whatever, Rock in a Hard Place. I don't know what they became down there, and became these Blade Runners or something. And for the good and bad of it, they made 1,000 mistakes, because I know Jim, I think, ended up going to Bill Watts' territory, and he got his ass kicked, I guess, in a dressing room. I heard by somebody. Don't know if it was like, I can't think who it was, but anyway, they made their mistake.
Watts himself had some type of confrontation with Jim.
Yeah.
And Sting. No, it was Sting that got his ass kicked by what's his name?
Was it Bob? No, not Bob Roop.
Dick Slater.
Dick Slater. Dick Slater. That's who I pictured his face, couldn't get his name out. Yeah, Dick Slater. Yeah, and I had heard those kind of stories, But that's just part of the business. They were big guys, and sure, they probably went in a little overconfident because they were in probably better shape looking than a lot of the boys in the territory. I mean, when you look at those guys compared to Al Madril or Chavo Guerrero, for that matter, body wise, not talent wise, of course, but body wise, a promoter was starting to elevate them, which makes jealousies, creates egos, and everything else. So their overconfidence probably led them to a lot of problems. And I understand that. I didn't have those problems because I never had the body. So I never had those kind of ego problems. I looked at the business completely different.
Are you so surprised at how fast they became superstars?
Yes. I never would have thought that. I never envisioned them to go as far as they did ever. It surprised me that within a few years, they're both world champions of WCW and WWF. That was shocking. In one way, it's surprising, and in another, it wasn't, because they did have this extra abnormal drive. And Sting had that drive, and Jim did too. Jim had the drive in the gym, which developed that body. And of course, I know steroids are involved, but he had a drive like very few men. He had the drive of a professional bodybuilder. And you know what kind of drive that takes, that diet and sacrifice so much to do this. It's incredible. And they made those sacrifices. And Steve obviously was the better wrestler. But he was in a territory where it was necessary in WCW. That was just the style that he worked out perfect for them, to work with Ric Flair and all the guys he did. I watched a lot of those matches with a lot of pride. And I remember all those workouts we had. And I saw Steve, the spring in his legs. He could have been an outstanding basketball player or any sport for that matter. He's a natural athlete. He was like Louie Spicoli to me, how he became just natural mentally. He remembered everything. When I used to work high spots and things in Mexico and have Spicoli as my partner, I'd ask Lewis, we got in the ring, I said, do you remember the finishes in half of these spots that this trio of Hispanic guys that don't even speak a word of English wanted to do in the dressing room? I don't remember any of it because it just good. Lewis would say, Bill, I'll tell you when to do things. He's my student. He's telling me what to do. That's how much faith I put into some of those guys because I trusted their judgment. They were natural in the business for this business. I'm the one that brought Rico Costantino to the School of Hard Knocks, too. In 96, I did an athletes ministry conference in Princeton, New Jersey. And I was with Jake Roberts, Evander Holyfield, a lot of guys there, a lot of athletes, Meadowlark Lemon, a lot of different athletes from different sports. And I met Rico, and Rico says, hey, I live in Las Vegas. He says, I always kind of thought I wanted to give wrestling a try. I said, brother, I have a wrestling school in San Bernardino, 3 or 4 hours away from you, 3.5 hours away. Why don't you come down? And he came down there and started training. And another totally gifted athlete, just real sincere athlete, pure athlete.
Now, a fan wanted me to ask you, there was some talk in 93 that Warrior was going to go to WCW and potentially feud with Sting. What do you think about if that would have happened? Would you think that would have been a cool feud, or would they have not meshed well?
I kind of tend to think it wouldn't have gone well, personally. I just don't think. I think what they did with Warrior in WWF or WWE, I think was the right way to present him, wrestling against like Bobby Heenan and different characters of him just doing power things. I don't think it would have come off the same working with Sting as the same. But I was there in 96, I believe, at the Bash at the Beach in Huntington Beach, California, a WCW show where Jim came in and he was negotiating because he came in. I saw him there and he was negotiating with Eric Bischoff, and he went into Sting's trailer, and they were talking about doing some stuff. And I don't remember whatever happened to that. I was kind of really wrapped up in my wrestling school at the time, all through the 90s and early 2000, 2001. But I don't know whatever materialized from that. But I was just there behind the scenes talking to Gene Okerlund, Nick Bockwinkel, Arn Anderson, and different guys that were friends of mine, talking to them. And it's where I met Angelo Poffo and was talking to Randy Savage and different guys there. But I know, I think Warrior, his run was perfect for WWF at the time. What they wanted out of him, to be a kid's superstar, be a fan of the kids, to look up to this amazing athlete that ran to the ring and all this power and glory and all this stuff. And that was it. He was just the ultimate baby face.
Did you ever see them in the actual weightlifting gym?
Yes, I saw Jim working out. It was pretty amazing at Gold's Gym. I went down there a couple of times because Don Ross, who wrestled as Ripper Savage, was a very good friend of mine, and he had an office at Gold's Gym in Venice. And I don't know, you know Don Ross. He was a former Mr. America, and back in his day. But he became a writer for Muscle and Fitness and all these different magazines, Iron Man, and all this stuff. And I go down and visit Don. He's a good guy, and I'd see Sting and Warrior down there training and everything. And it was real intense. And that's where Mark Miller was actually one of the other four guys. He was an employee at a front desk of Gold's Gym. That's how he supplemented his income and everything. And those two guys, Garland Donahoe and Mark Miller, never went really anywhere. They worked a couple indie shows around Los Angeles in probably 86, and then they phased out and never really heard anything from them ever again. And so obviously that proved the point that Steve and Jim knew they needed to be off on their own. And it was far more reasonable, like I said, of two guys going into a territory. It was very acceptable. Four guys, I didn't see it. I mean, God bless Rick Bassman for having that vision to do a Power Team USA and have these four guys, red, white, and blue baby faces, wearing these beautiful matching outfits. Great concept. I didn't see it personally, but who knows?
And of course, Rick Bassman went on to start a lot of people's careers, such as the John Cena's, the Hyde Wrights, a lot of long list of wrestlers. Did he ever hold anything against you for how that worked out?
Not that he ever told me. We've never had words about that. And that's why, I mean, in hindsight, obviously looking back on things, it's embarrassing to admit in my own way, I kind of screwed over Rick and my best friend, Red Bastine, who I'm living with. Red could have probably used 15% of their money for the next 5 years under contract or whatever. I didn't mean to hurt these men. They were my friends too. I knew Rick Bassman. I knew Red. I love those guys too. I had a lot of respect. But Jim and Steve asked me for an opinion to be straight with them. And I was straight with them. I said, if I was you, I would go to Tennessee. I said, Lawler will treat you right in giving you the bookings you need to get the experience. So I had no regret on telling them that. Obviously, somebody's going to get hurt any way you cut it. And I don't know where they would have ended up if they would have gone to Calgary. It's hard to say, putting those two guys in Calgary and what Stu might have done to them. Probably kicked the shit out of them for sure. That dungeon would not have been kind to them. No. That's for sure.
I think it was harder territory than Mid-South, and Mid-South was a really hard territory just because of the travel and the weather conditions. So it probably would have ended similar to the way Mid-South ended for them.
Yeah, that's what I imagine. I just, I had heard stories for 10 years about how brutal the winters are in Canada. So, I mean, my common sense said, stay where it's warmer. I meant that. And plus, not only the weather, I looked at the wrestling part of it. And I was honest with them and told them, you guys will get the experiences, what you need.
And also for the percentage that those guys were supposed to pay Red and Rick Bassman, I've actually never heard of any of those trainer percentage deals actually being honored. Sometimes I've heard the wrestlers have given like a payoff. Like I think Ric Flair gave Vern Gagne a flat fee, but I don't think any wrestlers ever given like 15% of their pay for 5 years.
Well, I mean, I couldn't imagine it. Now, I'm sure Red maybe could have set something up with Stu because they were friends and maybe made that happen as far as that aspect for a while up there. But once they left there, I don't know, when they booked out of there, I don't know where Red would still be getting this honor of this, receiving this money. it's something I never got involved in training with Spicoli or anybody else that I ever trained. I did take some booking fees, putting the boys on WWF TV, because I figured this is helping give them an opportunity to showcase themselves. Sure, you're going to do a job, but you're also, it worked out for Spicoli. This is how he became very, very good friends with like Ricky Steamboat and Owen Hart and many of the boys in WWF, to where when he came in as Rad Radford, they knew him. They knew him, and they treated him with a lot of respect. He wasn't just some mark guy coming in. Of course, he handled it bad because he started. That's when he was taking pills, getting on this habit of being one of the boys. A lot of that he got from X-Pac and Scott Hall, Rob Van Dam, and a lot of great guys. But he was hanging around a lot of boys that would ask him, because Lewis lived in San Pedro, California, one of the LA suburbs. They'd ask him to go to Tijuana, go to the drugstores and pick up somas and bring all the stuff across the border, which Lewis could have gotten a lot of trouble for if he would have been caught, but he never was caught. And so, you know, it's like it was all detrimental to his career being around the big name guys, because they abused his generosity, and he was a childlike guy, and he was 27 going on 18. He was just a kid, and great heart.
Steve DeSalvo, who is the second Steve Strong, I think you had a hand in his training as well. Yeah. He was really over in this area. A lot of people wanted me to ask you about him.
Yeah, Steve DeSalvo was part of the 6 guys in this training class, and Steve was strong as hell. What a power lifter he was. I think if Steve's only fault that I could tell you was he didn't respect the business enough to dress real well. I remember Vince was taking a look at Steve, and he came into TV tapings in Phoenix here. I don't even know what year it was, 87. I don't even know, somewhere around there. He had been in Puerto Rico, I think, and then he was getting a tryout in Phoenix. He showed up, and you see in the picture I posted of that group shot of us with those torn sweatpants. That's how he showed up at the arena. He was wearing a pair of sweatpants, all ripped to shreds. He looked like, he had a body on him, powerful as hell. Looked like he hadn't combed his hair in 3 weeks, and he showed up with a big tear in his. You don't make an impression with Vince like that. You can't do that. You have to have a certain elegance a little bit to yourself, and a little bit different style. I don't know if that was a definite turnoff by the agents. You had Jack Lanza, Rene Goulet, George Steele, Strongbow, all the boys, all those agents, Pat, all those guys looking at him saying, is he going to show up at the arenas looking like this too? And we had the dress code kind of thing going on. So it's all stuff that hurts you. But Steve had a no kiss ass policy. He didn't give a shit. He didn't care. He didn't care.
Cheerleader Melissa Anderson is one of, I think, the most current known stars that you've trained. She's not actually your daughter, although a lot of people think she is, right? Something like that.
It's my working niece.
Okay.
Here's the deal. Her father, Doug Anderson, I trained him right after working with Sting and those guys, after the Bastille deal. I started working with Doug Anderson. Doug was a Los Angeles police officer for 27 years, motorcycle cop. And I met Doug because he was working security at the LA Sports Arena. And Doug was a big guy, about 6'2", 6'3", good-sized man, powerlifting kind of guy. And we became instant friends and very, very close friends. And I knew Melissa from the time she was like 2 years old. And I would go over to Doug's house all the time. We would train at different places around Los Angeles, weightlifting and in the ring. He would take me to the LA Police Academy and places where they had a ring set up he had access to, and we would train there. And I broke Doug into the business. Well, Melissa, like I said, was only 2 years old. She's a little girl. So about 12, 14, 15 years later, all of a sudden she's a teenager and she's wanting to get into wrestling, and she's beautiful. Her mother is Hispanic, and her mother was beautiful. So Melissa became a very beautiful young lady herself. So Doug instantly thought, bring her to me. And he had Goliath and different people training with her, Mondo Guerrero and different people. I was part of her training group of guys. and working with her. But it was a sincere honor. She had a high work ethic. And I always discouraged women. This is how I actually met my ex-wife. I met her while training at Red Bastien School. And in the racquetball court, Red introduced me to my ex-wife. He says, "Hey, I got this girl here, works in the gym here. Works as an employee, and she wants to become a wrestler." Well, as soon as he introduced me to her, she was really pretty. And I said, "Okay." So we started dating, and one thing leads to another, and we ended up getting married, but I discouraged her from being a wrestler. I says, what woman in their right mind wants to go out there and get their hair pulled, get hit up on by guys? You know, the boys. Oh my God, how brutal. I says, I can't imagine what you would go through in the dressing rooms with the guys and all this stuff on shows. He says, I've been there, done it all myself, so I know how you'll be treated. And in the ring, you're going to have women that are going to mistreat you. You're going to have great women workers, but you're going to have women that are going to beat the shit out of you. And I says, I'm telling you, swear to you, I wouldn't do it if I was you. So I talked her out of it. Of course, that later became a resentment in my marriage when I'm off on the road doing my stuff, going to Hawaii, going here, going there. And she'd say, oh, you get to do all this stuff and I can't do anything. I'm at home and I'm stuck at home and blah, 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 blah. It's like, I'm sorry. But I was doing it for her best interest. It's giving her words of advice, solid advice.
And at that time, there was a lot less money in women's wrestling. Even now, overall, I think Becky Lynch is the only one really making money these days. Probably Charlotte Flair, too.
Yeah, this was really in '86. This would have been very primitive for the women. I mean, there was rare bookings and, Moolah was helping people. Different people were helping people, but it was tough. And this is the reason I have my son. I never encouraged my son to be a wrestler, ever. I never, ever. My son is taller than me. I'm 6'2". My son is bigger than me. Skinny, but he's bigger than me. He's 30 years old. But I never encouraged him, never hooked a hold on him once in my life, never once, because I didn't want him to get the bug to want to do this. I knew how brutal it was.
Now, you were in charge of, as you mentioned, hiring extras and hiring ring crew and stuff. Obviously, there was the big scandal in the early 90s with Mel Phillips, who I guess had your job in another territory. Did that put more heat on you, even though I've never heard a bad thing about you, but just because they had so much heat over the Mel Phillips thing?
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about that, because I'm glad you brought that up, because I want to stress a couple of things. One, I met Mel Phillips and I knew Mel Phillips very well. I can tell you, because when you talk about Mel Phillips, two other names instantly become part of Mel Phillips. And that's Terry Garvin and Pat Patterson. Always those three become somewhat synonymous. I can tell you, in all my years, I started in this business in 73 actually, but 74, my first match, and met Pat for the first time at 83. Saw Pat the last time just 4 years ago at CAC reunion in Vegas. And I knew Terry Garvin a lot through the 80s and 90s. He helped me tremendously. And never once, not one time, did I ever have Pat, Terry Garvin, or Mel Phillips with anywhere up to 18 guys, good looking bodybuilding kind of guys I would take to TV or anything, all over the place. I even took 4 guys in the 1991 or something or 89. I took guys up to Calgary and Edmonton TV. All through the whole West Coast, I never had them hit up on any of my guys. Never had any disrespect shown to any of my boys. Me, never was hit up on. And I was handsome in my day. I'm not now, and I'm not. I'm just saying that. In my day, I was a good-looking guy. All the guys, I had good-looking guys. I had great athletes, great guys in shape that would be attractive to a other person's requirement, and never had them talked about, or none of the guys ever came to me and said, hey, Bill, one of those guys in the office said this to me or wants me to come to the room. Never shown disrespect by Mel Phillips or any of those guys, Terry Garvin. And Terry Garvin would call me. He'd say, Bill, I have 4 shows in New Mexico starting tomorrow. Can I fly you out? You got it, Terry. He says, I will FedEx a ticket. I need you at LAX tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, flying you for 4 house shows in New Mexico. You'll get $250 a night and hotel. Yeah, Terry, $1,000. I work with DJ Peterson on shows in New Mexico. I think the main event was like Harley Race against Tito Santana. They had Lord Littlebrook against Little Tokyo, just a little spot show, a little like what they call a C show, a third-rate show to sell to a high school. And Vince would book these shows, and they needed extra talent. And Terry would call me. Sometimes Terry, he called me for Calgary and Edmonton. Like there wasn't 100 extra wrestlers to wrestle those tapings. And Terry would call and say, Bill, I got 4 slots open. Do you want to go up to and do Calgary and Edmonton TV? I go, yeah. He says, okay, bring Tim Patterson, bring Louie Spicoli, bring yourself. And fine, Terry. He called me and said, Bill, I got some tapings in Omaha, Nebraska, and someplace in Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa. Yeah, Terry, whatever you need. He says, bring a couple guys. Great. He says, I'll send you a ticket. Never any, but need to talk to you when you get there. None of this bullshit. None of it. Ever. 100% professional that I saw. I can't speak for John Cole or whatever his name was, the Cole guy, the ring crew guy.
Tom Cole or something.
Tom Cole. Can't speak for him. I can only speak that I was around these boys from 83 to about 96, quite exclusively on the West Coast and all that. Milt Phillips would come out all the time. And I never, ever, ever, ever had a bad word said by any of those 3 guys to any of my boys personally. And I hope at least that answers part of that situation, that I never saw any of it. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I don't know. Don't know.
But did you notice after that, or maybe you'd already moved on from that role after that? Did anything change?
No, I never saw that. It was actually because Terry ended up leaving his job at WWF. I don't know if he got fired or retired.
I think he resigned. I think Mel and Terry and Pat resigned. Pat was the only one that came back, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, and Pat's resigning was just the biggest work on the face of the earth anyway, because he was with Vince, and he will be to the end. End of Vince's dying days. I mean, Pat's always there. The respect that they have for each other, through the good and bad of it, they're loyal to each other. But when Terry left his position, another guy, can't think of his name off the top of my head. He was a total asshole. He was a photographer for the WWF. He became the transportation guy the job that Terry had. And he was real tough to deal with. He had a secretary that absolutely hated me when she'd call me. We had words. They were very rude, disrespectful, because they weren't one of the boys. Terry was one of the boys. And when you're one of the boys, just like Gene LeBell and helping out with the boys in Hollywood, when he had stunt work, he would call the boys first. Before he called his fellow stuntmen, he'd say, Mondo Guerrero, you got a couple days open? I got some work for you. Or Chavo Guerrero, or Jack Armstrong, Smirnoff, all you guys, Tanaka, Professor Tanaka, all you guys, I got work for you guys. Terry Garvin was the same way. When an opening came up, he took care of the boys. And this guy, can't think of his name. I can picture his face. We never got along because he had no respect for the wrestlers, none. So I was just dead weight to him, being in charge of the ring crew, ring announcing, refereeing, or wrestling. He could care less. Could care less about extra bookings, extra money. He was penny pinching for Vince. Terry Garvin did not penny pinch for Vince. Although Terry Garvin did tell me words of wisdom that I could take to my grave, and I'll tell you this. We were at TV tapings one time, and I had to hand in all my receipts for ring crew work, whether I was buying new plywood, new ropes, new this, new that, gas receipts, hotel receipts for different shows for the month before. I gave Terry receipts once, and it totaled like $735, whatever it was. And Terry says, okay, and he's looking at all the receipts. He's got a calculator, and he pays me. He rounds things off. It's like if a room was $35, he said, okay, I'm going to give you 40 for the room. I'll give you receipt for 45 for gas. He said, I'm going to give you 50, or I'll give you 60 for gas. Always put it up. Always on everything. You give me a couple dollars more, round it off. 50. We'll round that 35 off to 50. You're good. Blah, blah, blah. So one time after he had done all that, I remember it vividly, and it was a lesson. I'll embarrass myself by telling the story. I found a receipt for I think it was rolls of tape, the red, white, and blue tape for the ring. And I had a receipt for like $6 and something. And I went back to Terry at the TV. I said, Terry, I'm so sorry. I found another receipt in my bag. I got to give you. And he goes, Bill, I'm going to tell you some words right now. Remember this. Don't step over a dollar bill to pick up a quarter. And, you think about it, very wise. He'd already probably overpaid me $50, $60, $75. And there I am complaining about $5 or $6 receipt. And it was like, you're right. You're right. You're right. You're right. And I'll take that to my grave.
Now, you mentioned Pat Patterson probably will have a job for life. Are you surprised that last week it came out they furloughed Gerald Briscoe?
Yeah, I kind of am, because I thought Jerry had that same spot that Pat did, because when Jack and Jerry, I guess, sold their interest in whatever territory it was back in the 80s,
Georgia, I think.
Yeah, the Georgia thing. I thought part of their deal was that they could work there in some capacity for the rest of their lives. It was part of their, like a Gorilla Monsoon and a Fabulous Moolah and an Arnold Skolin, Freddie Blassie deal, that you have a job for life. That's what I understood. Of course, I wasn't in on those bookings on like that and how the contracts went. But like I told a friend of mine the other day on the phone, I don't think it should be looked down. I don't think Jerry Briscoe, let's not feel too sorry. Jerry's a hell of a guy, but let's don't feel sorry for him. I think he's quite wealthy.
Oh, yes.
I don't think
he is in his 70s.
I don't think he's going to be hungry and homeless. So I look at it like, think of the 6-figure salary that he's had for the last 35 years. I don't think he's hurting. So I feel bad that anybody gets fired, but Jerry's going to be eating better than I am for the rest of his life than my life. And I don't feel too bad. And maybe he needs the rest. Maybe it's best that he has some time to enjoy himself and his family.
Now, just to finish off here, I got about 4 or 5 fan questions. You don't have to answer in too much detail. Someone asked, any memories of Slammers, the wrestling school?
Yeah, Slammers. I have a lot of great memories. And Vern Langdon was a hell of a guy that ran Slammers. At the time, I didn't appreciate how nice he was. When Vern retired and moved here to Mesa, Arizona in 2000, and I was around Vern in 90 and 91. And Vern moved to Phoenix here in 2005 and lived here until 2011 until I think that's when he passed away. We would go out to dinner, just like I do with Billy, go out to lunch and dinner with Vern. And I really hated myself for the not disrespect I showed Vern at the time in 90 and 91, but the lack of further respect that I showed, and sticking up for Louie Spicoli, who Vern hated with a passion. He caught Louis looking through his Rolodex one day, and because us as wrestlers, we're always skeptical of people, always skeptical. And when I told Vern how much I loved some woman from Entertainment Tonight, I can't remember her name off the top of my head. Vern says, Bill, she's one of my best friends. And I said, yeah, right, Vern. Right, yeah. And he says, you want to meet her? And I can't think of her name right now. Beautiful woman. And he sent me down to the studios, and she came up. She says, oh, my God, you're a friend of Vern's. Made me feel like a fool. And Vern's the one that introduced me to Jimmy Valiant, who I thought, you don't know Jimmy Valiant. Sure enough, Jimmy Valiant walks in the gym one day, and we all go out and have lunch. Jimmy puts me in his book, big paragraph in his book, all because we had lunch. And I've been friends with Jimmy for the last 20 years, 30 years. And all because of Vern. I didn't believe Vern at the time that he was a makeup artist in Hollywood and this and that about him. I was so wrong. He did the makeup for Planet of the Apes. If you look at the IMBD thing of full cast and all this other stuff, he's in the makeup. And I have pictures of him making up Roddy McDowell in his ape outfit. I didn't believe it at the time. I didn't believe nothing because we're skeptical. We're born that way in the business.
Most people in the wrestling business are liars.
Yes. Well, we've all seen it. I can tell you a half a dozen times I saw so-called workers go in and do matches. They had never been in the ring before, but they bullshitted the promoter. Yeah. I bailed Jerry Monty out one time. He was in the ring with a mark that bullshitted his way. We knew we knew the guy was a bullshitter, and he was telling everybody in the dressing room how much he's done this and that. This is about 87 or so, little indie show. And it's like, we never heard of this guy. He doesn't know nothing. Soon as he got in the ring, he ran to hit the ropes. He smacked the side of his head on the ropes. We told myself and Tim Patterson, we told the promoter, let us go in there and bail Jerry out because he's going to get hurt. He's our friend. I don't give a shit about this other guy, but don't let Jerry get hurt. Jerry's the sweetest guy, a big time, nice guy. So he let us do a run in and throw this guy through the ropes and end the match like a DQ thing. We saw that a million times, people BSing their way into the business. I see it all the time. I get people on Facebook all the time. I did this. I did that. I did this. And it's like, I was on that show with you. And it's like, I go back and look at the lineup. It's like, you weren't on that show. I saved everything I ever did pretty much. I know people are BSing. They're still BSing. They had this career or that career. Believe me, Devin, if I ever tell you something, I'm telling you the truth, because if I can't imagine, I can't even tell you half the stuff I did that would be even further the truth, but it'll make me look like I'm bullshitting, and I don't want to ever go that direction. I've done so many things, outlandish things, that I'm embarrassed by. That's why it's hard for me to do an autobiography, because it's where do I leave off the real intense stuff that I've done versus what's more mainstream and politically correct things to say in a book. It's hard. I have to be very careful. The things I did with Louie Spicoli, I couldn't begin to print. And it's just like, but that's part of the business that we all know, and as being a celebrity to certain fans and everything.
And someone wanted to know if you had any experiences with The Undertaker.
Yeah. Good experiences. That's how I met the Godfather, was through the Undertaker. And when I was training at Slammers, I had just got to know Undertaker a little bit in WWF, and they were going to bring in Godfather as
Papa Shango.
Papa Shango, yeah. And he needed to work on some moves, and he needed some guinea pig guys to take bumps for him to understand how this gimmick might work with certain things. So Undertaker brought Papa Shango down, and Charles Wright brought him down to Slammers, which is where I met him in 1990, to let him work with my guys. And I had Louie Spicoli and a set group of guys that could take outstanding bumps for him to help him understand how he could do his Papa Shango gimmick and make it work. And then Shango lives in Vegas, so he would come down after that in San Bernardino at mine and Jesse's school and work on stuff when he became Kama and things like that, working on boxing and shadow boxing, because in the 90s, mid 90s, there just wasn't the opportunities with like MMA gyms and things like that in Vegas like there are now, where you could go anywhere and find a ring almost. But back in those days, it was exclusive. You had to go to a wrestling school, and there wasn't really, I don't think, anything around Vegas for him. So you'd come down to San Bernardino and spend a night and hang out and train and work out with the guys. But that was the Undertaker.
And somebody wanted to know why, in your opinion, California Championship Wrestling failed. You wrestled there, I guess.
Yeah. I was part of that group, wrestling. Jimmy Snuka, Rocky Johnson. They brought in some names. Alexis Smirnoff, different guys through a couple of years. The problem part of it was they had a commentator. I can't even think of the main guy. He was an obnoxious guy that ran the whole thing. But he brought in another old time wrestler that was so unfamiliar with the local talent, the new talent, so far out of his element. It would be just like me commentating on matches today with the new guys in the ring. It's like, okay, that skinny guy that just did that move, I can tell you that looked really good. That's about how I would talk, because I don't know the guy's name. I don't know him from nothing. And this guy, I can't think of his name. He was an old school 50s wrestler in Southern California mainly. And he had a chain of pizza parlors around Bakersfield at different places in California. And this guy, the commentating was horrendous. And we had some great wrestlers, Steve Strong, or Steve Sapella, the second, or the original Steve Strong. And that was always very confusing to fans. When Steve DeSalvo became Steve Strong, that really messed with some people's minds that knew both guys. And so when you say Steve Strong, it was like, You talking about DeSalvo or the other guy, the big tall blonde guy, or the shorter power lifter guy? And but the promotion was just, it was destined for failure. We had great Goliath. We had a lot of Victor Rivera, a lot of great talent, but it was just, every promoter in those days wanted to become Vince McMahon. You've seen it. Every promoter thinks that they're going to be the next Vince McMahon or Ted Turner at those days, and they're going to run the other out of the business. And I know you had a question because I saw it about Paul Alperstein and the AWF. I was a ring announcer for AWF in, I want to say 95, 96. I can't remember. We did tapings in Tampa, Florida. We did tapings in Chicago. And what marathon days they were, it was like 45 matches to a taping. And I was the ring announcer, 45 matches each day, 2-day taping. So it was like 90 matches in Tampa.
The same crowd?
They brought, Paul Alperstein was the biggest mark on the face of the earth. Nice man, but he paid extras, just like a movie production. He paid like 400 extras, bought them a bag lunch or a box of lunch, just like a movie production. Treated it like that. He went through a company in Chicago, and I think he did the same thing in Tampa. I don't know. I can't remember Tampa as well as definitely in Chicago he did it. And he would pay extras to sit in the crowd, cheer when they're supposed to cheer, boo when they're supposed to, just like a movie set. The director telling them what to do. And they were guided by Terry Taylor, Mick Karch, different guys were commentating. And I was the ring announcer in all those. Tito Santana, I believe, was the booker. And if you saw my comments on my Facebook Live, I never liked Tito Santana. You might see this. I don't care. I never liked him. I have no use for Tito Santana. Personally, I wrestled him a couple times.
He was very lazy. The one time I used him, he was extremely lazy in the match. Yeah. And I wouldn't say that about a legend.
Yeah, and I know. And I'm not, I'm not knocking Tito's success. You can't knock it. Yeah, he got the Intercontinental Championship. He was a very big name, and that's why he could still be a name today in conventions and all that. So be it. But I can tell you one thing he did. I was refereeing at the LA Sports Arena, a match between Iron Sheik and Tito. And Tito was, talk about laziness, this falls right into what you just said. He was so lazy kicking out of I take it back. I wasn't the referee. I don't know what I'm saying. Red Shoes Dugan is the referee. That's where the story's going. Red Shoes Dugan, legendary old man referee, fantastic guy. I think he was like 78 or 79 when he passed away. 78 years old. This man could still do one-arm push-ups in the dressing room. That's the shape he was in. It was like Jack LaLanne, legendary strength, hands, one-arm fingertip push-ups in the dressing room, 78 years old. So he's out there refereeing Tito and Iron Sheik. And Tito is supposed to pin Iron Sheik at the end of this match, but he was lazy kicking out of a 3 count or a false pin. And Red Shoes goes 1, 2. Tito's not even budging. 3. Tito kicks out through the biggest stink fit and goes back into the dressing room and has Red Shoes fired for ever refereeing again because of his incompetence. And he's too old to referee. Too old. That's what Tito told Strongbow and Pat Patterson and all that. And it was not Red Shoes' fault. What are you going to do? You got 15,000 people watching you. You're not stupid.
That was in WWE?
Yeah. That was a house show for Vince at the Los Angeles Sports Arena. You can only waver on that 3 count so long. And you finally.
Yeah. Oh, no. As a promoter, I would fire the ref, to be honest, if they had held their hand up.
Red Shoes knew the finish. He knew Tito was supposed to go over, but Tito's the one too easy to kick out. He's going to make it real, like, let's wait till 3.5 count before I can kick out. It's like, no, brother, it don't work like that. He got my friend fired. Red Shoes is the sweetest man you'd ever know. Him and his wife, Martha, were steadily at every show for Vince on the West Coast during that time period. Red Shoes didn't need the money. He was a retired cop from Santa Monica. He was very wealthy, saved every dime he'd ever made. He did it for fun. He, like Andre, he loved the business to want to be around it to his dying days. But Tito had him fired. And I never forgave Tito for that. 2 other things happened. One was my time I mentioned in my Facebook thing where Tito threw a punch, his little flying burrito punch, broke his finger on the top of my head because he potatoed the shit out of me. And then goes back to the dressing room and it screams and cries to Pat Patterson that I broke his hand. Pat says, wait, I don't understand. I didn't see this, but how did Bill break your hand when you threw the punch? His head potatoed you? That's how stupid Tito was. Dumb. And then the third thing was when I was doing the ring announcing for Paul Alberstein, I quit. I did one set of tapings in Tampa, and they wanted to continue and run another set of tapings a couple months later in Tampa. And I had my fill of working with Tito. Tito I wasn't fat then. I wasn't out of shape and heavy. I was filling out my tuxedo pretty good, but I was not overweight. And Tito would constantly stay on me about losing weight. And I'm not completely knocking him for that. I understand there's some good in all that theory. But the point is, he drove me to the point where I just didn't want to be around him anymore. I was getting sensitive about it. I just said, you know what? I fit in my tuxedo just fine. I make it through the ropes, and I can do my job just fine. My belly has nothing to do with my voice, and I'm doing just fine. And Tito called, and Jesse Hernandez takes this call at our wrestling school, and he says, hey, Tito wants to confirm you're going to do the ring announcing next month. He's going to send the plane tickets. And I said, F him. I'm not doing it. I'm done. I don't need this shit. Do 90 matches and getting paid a couple $100. 90 matches? They were marathons. And yeah, I was hanging out with Tommy Rich and oh my God, Buddy Roberts and the Road Warriors, whoever else, Greg Valentine, and I don't even know. It's just a who's who of the business. You know, it was a lot of guys that either, if you weren't working for WCW or Vince, you were working those tapings. And it was a great group of guys, and I have nothing but fond memories of that. But I was busting my ass. My voice was shot at the end of 45 matches. I couldn't even.
So it didn't last long then.
Yeah. Yeah, it was hours and hours of tapings, and it was like for not much money. But I was just running my course with Tito. I was just like, I'd remembered so much in the past. I never liked the guy. I thought he was arrogant. I just didn't. If it would have been Brian Blair who was booking for Herb Abrams or different guys, I could have done it a little different. Brian was a lot easier to get along with than, and I did Herb Abrams stuff too. And I'm interested in this Dark Side of the Ring on Herb that's coming out. That's going to be really fascinating.
Well, maybe you could give us a preview of that. I don't know much about that Herb Abrams. We didn't get that show up here in Canada.
Yeah, well, he had the who's who of the talent too. You know, he had Steve Williams, Dan Spivey, Nikita Koloff, Brian Blair. He had Brian was the booker. And he had Rick Rude came in. Andre the Giant even showed up at one of his tapings in LA. Oh my God, David and Bruno Sammartino. Bruno was commentating. David was talent. Billy Jack Haynes was working. Bob Orton. Literally the who's who of the independent guys that weren't big names that weren't working were working for Herb. Some he was paying with cocaine, and some he was paying cash. I didn't see the cocaine part. I'm just saying what I heard in the dressing room gossip. But Herb was a character. He was a little guy, 5'7". I met him through Slammers Wrestling Gym through Wildman Jack Armstrong, because he came down there looking for a ring, looking for talent to do extras. Well, he used a lot of my guys on TV tapings as job guys in Reseda, California. I brought a lot of guys in, and he had Paul Orndorff. Now I'm thinking back. He had a great array of talent that all left WCW or Vince for a reason, whatever reason, fired, quit, whatever. They were all working for Herb. But Herb was a squirrely little guy with big dreams. Another one, going to run Vince out of this business. I will end Vince McMahon's career as a promoter attitude. And it's like, once you blow through a couple $100,000 of other people's money, you don't pay limo drivers, limo companies, trussels of light people for your TV tapings. You don't pay them for the rentals of your lights. You don't pay arenas. You don't pay a hotel. After you do that enough, finally, you stop being respected as a promoter, and the talent starts going down, and he ends up using lesser known names. And finally, through his coke abuse of his personal use, the promotion just disbanded. And then eventually as you'll see in this video, he's dead. And I know he's buried in New York, which is weird because I met him through LA, and he had a big house out in LA in the Hollywood Hills. And
What was his money from?
Right now, I want to say through drugs. I honestly don't know. I honestly don't know. Jack Armstrong introduced him, and Jack was a very enthusiastic guy. And Jack introduced me to half of the students I ever had because he'd meet him at Gold's Gym because he was training down there all the time. And Jack would say, "Billy, I got a great guy for you. Here's his phone number. I gave him your phone number, your business card." So one day, Jack, he's telling us, "Hey, there's a guy that's going to come down to Slammers. His name is Herb Abrams. He's a real big mark. He's got money. He wants to run shows and everything. Get your money. He can use you as a wrestler, ring announcer, whatever you want to do." I said, "I don't care, whatever." I was open. I don't referee, ring announcer. I don't. So I worked as an announcer sometimes, and sometimes I would be a wrestler. I worked with Paul Orndorff, Bob Orton on his tapings, different people under a hood as the Black Knight. And it didn't matter to me what I did. I was kind of the jack of all trades type of guy. I was available, whatever you needed. But Herb was a character, but he plowed through his money just like Paul Alberstein was an investment banker, and he plowed through $500,000 that he had saved up and through other investments he'd made. And Paul Alberstein was broke. The last I heard, he was like almost homeless way before he died. And at one time, put in $500,000 during these tapings in Chicago and Tampa. Crazy.
You've mentioned Andre a few times through this. How did you get along with Andre?
Andre was absolutely the greatest. Andre was a very nice man. I did a video for my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is Big Bill Anderson's Life Tours. I'm kind of slow in putting more videos up. I've got to get really back into the habit of doing that for my YouTube channel. I've only got like 5,000 subscribers as opposed to your 175,000, but I only got 5,000.
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
That's a good start.
I haven't put a lot of effort as much as I need to put into it, but I did a video on there. I was in the ring with Andre in, I want to say January of 85 at the LA Sports Arena WWF show. They ran a 20-man battle royal because that was a big thing with Michael Bell's old days. It was running the big 20-man, 18-man battle royals in the old days. So Vince wanted to kind of keep that tradition because he was still experimenting with expansion. He didn't want to book a full 20 guys flying out from New York or wherever all over the country. He wanted to keep a half a dozen or good 8 to 10 locals. So he did this battle royal, and I was part of the battle royal. Myself, Mickey Doyle, Al Madrill, John Tolis, Smirnoff. Alexis Smirnoff was living in Sacramento or San Francisco at the time. They flew him down, and different odd characters were flown. Tony Rocco from LA, and worked this battle royal. And my finish for it wasn't the finish of the battle royal, but my finish was I get Sergeant Slaughter in a corner, and they had Slaughter, Tito Santana, Mr. Fuji, Adrian Adonis, different guys were in it, and I'm beating on Slaughter. Finally, he makes a little comeback on me, beats me, turns me around, and whips me into Andre, who's in the opposite corner, and Andre sticks his boot up. And I run into Andre's big size 24-inch boot, whatever it is. I take a bump down. Andre covers me. And then all the guys dogpiled on top. And I have a photo of I think it's about 16 of the guys on top of me or trying to get on top of this huge pile. And I didn't take these pictures. Obviously, I had a friend just give me a bunch of pictures they took from the stands. So I wish I would have got the shot because Mil Mascaras he was in it. He got up on the top rope and did a dive to the top, which was he was famous for, on the top of this pile. Well, anyway, I'm on the bottom, and Andre was protecting me like a brick wall, and I was not hurt. I could have been killed, obviously, if we're talking shoot, with those kind of guys, Tony Gurria and all these boys piled on top of me, and Andre protected me. And I got a $400 payoff that night. I was the first one out of the Battle Royal, and I was in pig heaven. I mean, where else am I going to go make $400 in one night in 84 or 85? And I had a lot of memories of being around Andre like that. I was around him one night in L.A. when Jake's snake bit Andre, and Andre came back to the dressing room with a tooth stuck in his chest. And the old boxing doctor and wrestling doctor, Dr. Bernhard Schwartz, came in and had to stitch Andre up. He had a tooth in his chest. But Andre took it. He was a strong guy. He was a great
guy. Was he
guy.
mad at Jake over that?
No, he wasn't. He didn't like snakes. Like none of us really cared one way or the other, but for the most part. Coco Beware hated snakes. I can tell you that. When Jake would pull that snake out around Coco, he'd run like like you wouldn't believe. But Andre, I always found him to be very gracious. I asked, hey, can you pose for some pictures of some of my guys? And because obviously, no pun intended, but he's a freak of nature. He was just this bigger than life character, and everybody loved Andre. And he was just a great guy. You can't help but love an icon like Andre.
And the last fan question I'll ask you is, do you have an example of a good rib you ever played on someone or witnessed?
Yeah, I played a couple ribs on my boys. Let me tell you two real fast. I'll make them quick. I played a rib on one of my students. He was a referee for some shows for Steve Gatorwolf in Page, Arizona, which is right at the northern edge of Arizona before you go into like Utah or whatever, or Colorado, whatever it is. And this kid was like 17 years old, and we were on a 5 or 6 day road trip. And again, this is before computers, cell phones. You had to find ways of having fun and killing time, and ribbon and things like that were really normal in those days. I didn't do Dynamite Kid ribs. I didn't spike people's drinks, which I could tell you stories about that another time that he could have killed people with. But I didn't do mean ribs like that. But on this night, I was talking to a police officer outside in this gymnasium before the show started. It was about 6:00 in the evening for Steve Gatorwolf. And I'd brought over like 2 cars full of guys. Like it was Steve was the only Arizona wrestler. And all the other guys, the whole show was my guys from California. Ring announcer, referee, everybody else. Except maybe Navajo Warrior, Steve Eastloss. He might have been from Phoenix here, and he drove up. But so I went to this cop and I says, hey, I want to play a ribbon. We have this one kid, and he was talking. He's always stealing all the girls at every show we go to. He's like 16, 17, good looking kid, real tall, just a real baby face looking kid. And I says, hey, this kid was hanging out with this girl in this park last night at this town, whatever we were in the night before. And I says, I want to play a rib on this kid. I want you to go up and arrest him for raping. For raping this girl, and I want you to cuff him and everything. And he says, I don't want to get in trouble. In the 80s, you could probably do that. Nowadays, politically correctness would not allow for this kind of stuff. But in the 80s, we could do this and get away with it. So this cop, he says, okay, you tell me who he is and what his name is, and I'll go in and I'll play it up. You tell me when we let him off the hook. So the cop walks in. We're all just in there. I'm lacing my boots up, and he comes in and he goes, I probably won't say the guy's name because I don't want to embarrass him. But anyway, he says, is so-and-so here? And this kid turns around. He goes, yeah. And he's wearing his referee shirt. He goes, yeah, that's me. He says, son, were you in such and such town last night? And he goes, yeah. He says, can you please put your face up against the lockers right there? And this kid turns around. He says, what's going on? He says, just don't talk. Just do what I said. He puts it up. He says, can you put your left hand behind your back? And then your right, cuffs him. This kid, he's 16. He's so naive, 17. Tears are starting to fall down his face. And he looks over at me and I go, hey, officer, what's going on here? What are you doing to my friend here? He says, this young man, there's charges pressed against him for having relationships with a minor last night, a young girl in a park. I go, what? I said, are you insane? And we played this up, and this kid is bawling at this point. And all the wrestlers start to take a step toward the cop, and he's like, hey, just stay back. You don't need to be involved in this situation. This is between me and this young man here. And this kid is just going nuts. And the cop keeps looking at me like, how long are we going to let this go? And I pulled the cop aside. I says, let me talk to you for a minute, officer. And we walk over, and he tells this guy, stay right against the locker. Don't budge. And he goes, okay, I need to let this kid off the hook because I got to get back outside and do my job here because the show's getting ready to start. Gatorwolf's going to be very upset with us because we're playing this rib as it is. And so we walk back, and I walk up to John. I said, John, this is all a rib. oh, I said his name, but I didn't say his last name. Anyway, I said, this is a rib. Please don't get upset. And he goes, Bill, and he starts calling me every name in the book. And the officer said, I'm going to uncuff you. keep it simple and keep it easy and loose. Don't do nothing stupid. So he undoes it. To make a long story short, I ended up taking pictures of this guy, the referee, shaking hands with the cop, and all of us shaking hands with the cop and all this stuff. And that night I was in the main event with Gator Wolf, and I was supposed to pin Gator Wolf in the main event. And John was the referee, the only referee for the whole show. He wouldn't count my pin. Every time I went down to cover, he would just stand against the ropes like this and just say, I'm not counting. Yeah. And he didn't speak to me all the way home. But we laugh about that. He's friends with me on Facebook right now. We laugh about that. Let me tell you one more, and I'll make it faster than that. This is a story involving Curt Hennig. Because everyone knew in the business, if you were around in the 80s, that Curt Hennig loved practical jokes. He loved playing them. And he had a great sense of humor. So I played a joke with Hennig at the AWA tapings in Vegas because we were in the same dressing room. And as I mentioned before, the AWA, the Showboat, babyface dressing rooms in one corner, the heels are in another corner. Well, he was working against a guy named Harry Hill, one of my guys I brought up from LA. Thank God, not one of my students. I would never claim it because Harry was really the drizzling craps. And but he had a gimmick because he spray painted his hair all different colors, like rainbow colors. And his gimmick was he was a punk rocker, and he carried a chain in the ring. It was stupid. But it worked for him on indie stuff. The guy had no body. He was part of my ring crew, actually, for WWF for California for Vince. But he also worked indies. So I took him up. He's booked against Curt Hennig that night for the TV. And Curt was like, man, I want to play a rib on somebody. I want to do something, And I said, I got a great rib for you, brother. I said, the guy you're working with is Harry Hill. I said, his hair is all fake. I said, that's all fake stuff in his hair. And I said, and he hates having his hair pulled, brother. So Curt goes out to the ring, and this match is on ESPN Classics. I've seen it before. If you ever see him wrestling a guy named Harry Hill, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. He puts this guy in the corner, and he grabs as hard as you can grab a guy's hair, and he's pulling and jerking around all through this whole stuff through this match. And after about 6, 7, 8 minutes, he eventually beats this kid with whatever. I don't even remember what Kurt's finishing hold was. He beats this kid. He comes back to the dressing room. And he comes straight to me and he goes, I thought you said the kid's hair was fake. He says, I kept trying to pull the wig off the whole match. Not a wig, Curt. That was his real hair. It's fake coloring. And he goes, God, didn't make that clear. He says, that poor guy, I pulled his hair the whole match and I was shooting out there. So Harry rode up in my car with me to AWA in Vegas. So we're driving back to LA. The whole night he says, that I hate that bastard Curt. And I had never told Harry that it was all a rib. I just made it look like Curt was an asshole. and I don't think I ever talked to Curt further about that either. But it was just like, that was one of my great ribs. It was a great innocent rib, non life threatening.
That reminds me, one last question about the AWA. Did you have much interaction with Buck Zumhoff?
No, absolutely none. In fact, I don't even think I met Buck Zumhoff.
Okay.
But I know where you're heading for that. And I don't think I ever met the man.
Okay. I won't ask you about him then. Very controversial character.
Oh, I heard. Anything you want.
Okay.
You have anything I have on my Facebook page, which is my whole life, basically.
We might have to do a part 2 of this because, as I said, we ended up getting over 100 fan questions. I'm not going to ask them all, but I'll try and more than like do a career interview, I'll try and do this mainly get through the fan questions that they asked because you had such great feedback.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I know I saw a bunch of the questions they were asking. I know one person asked, why didn't Rick Rude ever wrestle for AWA? Who knows?
I filtered that. I took the better ones.
Exactly. You're a pro. Some of them are just like, they're such markish things that it doesn't even matter. It's like,
On the YouTube page, you had a lot more ones about your actual career, more so than the Facebook page. So We'll get into it if you're good to go.
Yeah, I think so. I'm sure you'll edit this correctly. And Like I said, I'm pretty new at this, and I haven't done an interview like this ever. I'm usually just sitting in my recliner on my phone and blah blah blah. But this is a little different because you're seeing me and everything. But it's cool. It's cool. Let's start this whole thing.
This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com, and today, as a special guest interview, we have Big Bill Anderson, former WWE competitor. He's also wrestled literally everywhere. He was also a referee for WWE, ring announcer for WWE, and he's an author. And we're going to get into mostly fan questions today. We had over 100 fan questions. We're not going to do all of them, but we'll get into as many as we can. How are you today, sir?
I am doing fantastic, Devin, and I really appreciate the opportunity to answer some questions here. Thank you.
And I've known you through superstar Billy Graham, who actually wrote the foreword to at least one of your books. You have three
Yes.
books that fans can order if they're interested. And the ones, I guess, with Billy Graham's forward on it, he is personally signed, which is worth the cost of the book right there.
Right. I sell this book here for $20. Billy's autograph is usually 35 or above alone, and it comes with this book. Billy wrote the foreword for this book graciously, and that is part of the order of that book. Yes.
Where could we order your books to get that out of the way?
I have a very small website. It's called bigbillanderson.us. Well, I'm sorry. I just went blank on my own website. Bigbillanderson.us, I believe. Yes, .us. I'm sorry.
And of course, I didn't mention in the introduction, one of your greatest accomplishments. Someone mentioned you should be in the Hall of Fame for trainers if there was one. You have trained countless stars in the wrestling business. Probably the two biggest names are Sting and the Ultimate Warrior, but you trained enough stars to have a whole book on that as well.
Right. And actually, that's kind of what I did in my first book, was a tribute to many stars that came through my wrestling school. Louie Spicoli is one of my bigger friends and stars that passed away when he was only 27. As you know, we could do a whole video just on the people that have passed away in our industry, friends of ours, dear friends of ours that are gone. And I did a book on Louie Spicoli and the Angel of Death and Sting and Warrior. That's my tribute book back to those gentlemen and ladies. Magnificent Mimi, I worked with her. Missy Hyatt, a few other girl wrestlers came through that I worked with, and it was a real honor to train all of them. And it made a lasting impact on my life, especially Louie Spicoli.
And Louis was just getting over. He was probably at his popularity peak in WCW. He also had the run in WWE as Radford, but they were letting him do commentary, which is where he was really starting to shine. When unfortunately, I believe it was an overdose or something, like so many wrestlers.
Yeah, he mixed wine and soma and maybe 40 or 50 soma. It wasn't just like one or two pills and have a glass of wine. It was 2 or 3 bottles of wine, 40 or 50 somas, because he had built up such a tolerance to it. And he was only 27 when he was found dead in his bedroom, laying on the floor. He basically choked in his own vomit, just like Janis Joplin died. The same type of thing, just was incoherent to breathe properly. And Louis, that took a piece of my heart. That was February 15th of 98. And I'll never forget it. He was my best friend for 10 years. I trained him right out of high school. One of the greatest kids I've ever known. He worked for ECW too. And his problem was he sustained a lot of injuries in wrestling for that brief period of time in 10 years. And a lot of them were wrestling Mark Henry in WWF or WWE at the time. He sustained a lot of injuries, and he started masking them like so many people do. We've all been there and done that. To compensate for the pain, you start over medicating, and he took it further and further and further. He wasn't into coke or none of those kind of things. It was all prescription drugs, which doesn't make it any better. Death is still death. But he did pass away at 27 years of age, and it's just so sad.
And he was also known as Madonna's boyfriend in Mexico. I remember that from the wrestling magazines. Did you get him booked in Mexico? I know you have a whole book on the fallen Mexico wrestlers. You were over
Right.
there.
No, I did not. I believe he got in through either Eddie Guerrero or he became friends with Art Barr somewhere along the line, and that's how he got in. I didn't have anything to do with that, but I was there at his shows in Los Angeles at the Sports Arena when AAA came in and did shows, and I was a part of those as a ring announcer even for a AAA show, which was a catastrophe as a ring.
Now, anyone that follows you on social media, I'm not sure if this is on your YouTube channel or not. I'll check it out. But you have a hobby that's pretty interesting. I like cemeteries myself,
Yeah.
but you like to visit cemeteries,
Oh,
take pictures next to gravestones. Could you tell us
yeah.
about that?
Yeah, I love it. About 10 years ago or so, I regret all the cities I've lived in my life that I didn't have this hobby or this desire when I lived in Chicago or Detroit or in Memphis and Nashville or in Texas or other places in my life that I lived. I didn't have the desire to go to cemeteries, but it became my hobby as I was looking up. I'm a big fan of old movies, Turner Classic Movie Channel, watching Clark Gable and Edward G. Robinson and Jimmy Cagney and all these old school 30s and 40s and 50s actors. I absolutely love the actresses and the way they dress and everything. So one day I was like, wow, I want to, where's this guy buried? I wonder whatever happened to him. So I research, Google search and see on their Wikipedia page where this guy's buried or something. It's like, wow, I want to go to his grave. I want to pay my respects to this lady. Man, she was beautiful. It became an infatuation with me. And it became something because I've been divorced from my ex-wife for many, many years. My son he turns 31 this August in California. And my son, when he was about 20, I was finding it hard when I go back and visit him every month or so. It's like, how do I spend quality time with my son? I don't know what to do as a part-time father like that, an out-of-state father. It was really tough. So I thought, okay, I did the route where I take him out for dinner with him and his girlfriend or take him to a movie or something. And I just felt that's so stereotypical of stuff to do for a father. And I've taken him to Disneyland or SeaWorld. I did all that stuff. And then I take him back home and then I just felt empty inside. And I thought, I want to go start visiting cemeteries. I want to start having fun and doing some things and doing some research. I'm really getting into this. So I take my son with me and we called them death tours and we had fun with it. It's like, today we're going to go to Forest Lawn and we're going to go visit 30 graves of Jimmy Stewart, or we're going to go to Dean Martin and Marilyn Monroe's grave. And we're going to go to Bob Crane, his grave. And we're going to go to all of these different celebrities. And I've been to every cemetery in Southern California and in Dallas, Texas, for that matter, too. I went a few years ago and visited the Von Erich family and Chris Adams and Haystacks Calhoun, which is in northern Texas, and also Dave Sheldon, Angel of Death, passed away, and I went to his memorial spot where he was cremated. And
you trained him, right?
Yes, yeah, he was part of the 6 guys with the class of '85, is what Red called it. A group of guys with Hellwig and Borden and those guys, yeah. And Dave Sheldon was a tremendous and nice, sweetest guy. Loved Dave Sheldon, very sweet, big giant of a guy, but a heart of gold. And so I wanted to pay my respects in Dallas and went to Red Bastien's grave also. Red Bastien is just down the hallway from Mickey Mantle. Tell me that's not some weird thing. He's literally 100 feet away from one of the greatest baseball players of all time, Mickey Mantle. So I have this big craving in my heart to go visit graves, and I've done that everywhere I go now, and it's my hobby. I love it. I find cemeteries, and I'm not trying to be funny, I find them so peaceful and relaxing, and I find them just a real beautiful tribute to go and take pictures of people's graves, and I post them, and I do videos for my YouTube channel on a lot of graves. Been to Louie Spicoli's grave a couple of times. I went on his 20th anniversary of his death, and several people I go to their graves and pay tribute with videos. And Yokozuna is buried in the same cemetery as Louie Spicoli, and I've been to his grave and I did a video on Yoko's grave too. And Yoko was a hell of a nice guy too, very, very nice guy. Knew him through Owen Hart mostly.
And is that Jose Gonzalez on your wall behind you there with the blood-soaked knife?
No, that's actually Peter Lorre. And now that you brought
Okay.
that, Yeah, my friend Scott Wilson in New York is a painter, and he does these paintings for me. He's done quite a few. I have other ones that I've done, but that's actually Peter Lorre. That's actually Ox Baker back here, right?
Yes,
That's
that's
Ox
cool.
he did, and he's doing other paintings like this for me. He's done a lot. I have probably about 15 of his paintings in different rooms, and Scott's been a good friend. He's a good friend of Billy Graham's too. He's Billy signs a lot of photos and things, and in the past and stuff for him, and done stuff for that like that.
Has Billy Graham given you any paintings?
Yes, I have one painting of a cactus that Billy gave me. I don't know where it's in my other room. Billy gave me, and um, I usually don't burden Billy with things like that because he's usually doing them as a tribute for a friend and giving
Okay.
them a people. And the greatest thing I have that was signed by Billy is I have my Bible that Billy signed to me in '96 after we did the Empty Ring. And we'll talk somewhere down the line here about I'll get you the copy of the video.
Oh
If not,
yeah,
I have
if you could get that to me, I'll pay the shipping on it, or
I,
if we could get
I
it
can
online somehow.
I can send you
Uh,
the DVD on that. I have copies of that.
because
Uh,
I know Billy Graham himself, I think it was a couple of years ago, maybe he forgot to ask you, but he said he really wanted that online because he was very proud of it.
oh, and rightfully so. That night that we did this event, I didn't even I kind of stopped short because I started rambling on. But um, Jake Roberts was in the ring at the end of this night, and there was maybe out of this crowd, there was maybe 500 to 750 people that came down and did the sinner's prayer at the end, an altar call. And Jake and Pastor Tommy Barnett were leading this. And Jake saw me in the wings of this building in this thousands of fans, and he saw me and he says, I think Big Bill Anderson's ready to come up here too. And I walked up there and I was like a kid at a funeral crying. And I gave my heart to the Lord that night. And that's because of Billy being having the heart he has, and Jake at that time, clean, sober, and everything else, and sincere. And it meant the world to me. But we videotaped that, and actually the videotape on that whole thing, and I had nothing to do with it. It's the way the production people at the church did. They end the video with me hugging kind of Pastor Tommy Barnett and shaking hands with a fan, reaching my hand down to acknowledge the fans that are in attendance that are right, pushed us up against the ring. So it was a really, really, really powerful thing, very impactful. And Pastor Tommy Barnett's done dozens of these type of sermons like this, illustrated dramas they call them. But he said he's never had one. It's his favorite one with the wrestlers, and being me and Jake at that time. We did another one in 2003, and that was with the Road Warriors and Buff Bagwell, Greg Valentine, Sting, Ted DiBiase, and Nikita Koloff.
Buff Bagwell, wow, I imagine that would have been interesting. I guess he's probably, I guess, gone the other direction since, unfortunately, but I never
Yeah,
knew he was involved in religion.
well, he was this one day. That's the only thing I can tell you.
Now, anyone that's watched this for the
By the way,
past,
yeah, Devin, by the way, that same day in 2003 was the day Kurt Hennig was found dead in his hotel room in Tampa or whatever city that was, because Animal or Hawk, one of the two, got a cell phone call right in the middle of our rehearsing that day for the night shooting of our Empty Ring like part two. And Hawk comes running over and he says, guys, get in a huddle here. And all of us got together and he says, they just found Kurt dead. So it was very impactful. We were there trying to talk to the fan, talk to people about the demons of this business. And there's one of our dear friends, Kurt Hennig, that they found dead. And I don't know what Kurt was, 40 years old, whatever. It was just, it hit us all like a ton of bricks. And Hawk was the one giving a testimony at the end of the night for this empty ring and this curtain call kind of thing of the fans coming down for the altar call. And Hawk was talking about what Kurt Hennig meant to him. Of all things, unscheduled, of course. We know he had other plans to talk about, but it all became a focus on Kurt Hennig because it was the day Kurt passed away. So we had that all weighing on our minds. And I was a ring announcer for that event. I didn't wrestle Jake or anything, or wrestle anything. So it was just a different scenario, but very impactful. But Billy put that together too, Superstar. So I have great things I've been involved with Billy through the years. Thank God. He's my dear friend, and I do anything for him, and he would do for me too. And raise him.
Now, to close this off, I know you've got your books there. I'm sure anyone that's watched this for the past 3 hours will be interested to.
Oh my God, it has 3 hours. I'm sorry, I didn't know. First time I'm looking at my clock, I didn't even know it's 3 hours.
No, the funny thing is, we only scratched the surface
Yes,
of your career. It's so extensive.
Yeah,
But maybe you could show your books for anyone that's interested.
Yeah. Okay. This is my first book. And this is my tribute to my students. Sting, Warrior, Angel of Death, Louie Spicoli, there's Steve DeSalvo. Different guys, different girls. Missy Hyatt, I met her through Slammers Wrestling Gym with Jason Hervey, trained them for a while. Nikita Koloff wearing one of my shirts. He came through my school and did some stuff. Rob Van Dam did a TV commercial or a TV show out of my school one time. So I got him wearing one of my shirts. So throw him on the cover. What the hell? And Magnificent Mimi, love her. Frankie Kazarian's another guy.
Magnificent Mimi, she was in a movie, right? The American Angels?
Yeah, she was in several movies, just real straight to video movies, but still beautiful, beautiful girl.
Oh, yeah.
Love her.
Good heel, too. She was a good heel.
Yeah. And then on the back cover, more of my students and Tim Patterson, my tag team partner, put him on the back cover with some moves, some wrestling training and things like that. So that's my first book. My second book was my tribute to Freddie Blassie, Bruiser Brody, Red Bastien, the Kangaroos, Dick the Bruiser, Professor Tanaka, my dear friend, Jack Briscoe, Andre the Giant, pictures in there with Andre, Big Boss Man, Randy Savage, and the original Sheik, of course, and Big John Studd, who I wrestled and was just the sweetest guy ever. And it's 27 men and women, fabulous Moolah. There's stories on Moolah, Dr. Jerry Graham, and Little Tokyo, Don Ross, Mr. America, and Red Bastien there, El Santo, and different people that I knew. And that was my second book as a tribute. And then my final book, the last book I did, it's a tribute to Fallen Friends of Mexico. And this book is talks about a lot of my traveling in Mexico City, Guadalajara, all the border towns of wrestling, the names down there, and people these are all passed away wrestlers that meant the world to me. Eddie Guerrero, Eddie's in my other book. No, Eddie's on this one. I'm sorry. Eddie's on this one. And just dear friends, all the Guerreros are, but Eddie, and I've been to Chavo's grave. We're talking about graves. I went to Chavo's grave in northern Arizona a while back, video there. But El Solitario and Hurricane Ramirez, Blue Demon, all these guys, the Los Villanos, Ray Mendoza, the father of Los Villanos, all these characters of Mexican wrestling, Lucha Libre, friends of mine. And I want to pay my respects to those gentlemen that influenced me quite a bit and made my life as a gringo going down the south of the border a pleasant experience instead of a unpleasant experience. And it made it very worthwhile and very memory induced for me. But people can buy my book at www.bigbillanderson.us. bigbillanderson.us. And there's a link on there. You can pay through PayPal or whatever. Or if you can't do that, you can find me and message me and figure out another way to pay on Facebook, and we'll figure out something. I work with people if they want to send a check or whatever. So, but hopefully, I had no idea we had gone this long.
No, my dog even had enough. She came in to say hi. She didn't want to be apart from me for that long.
Oh my God.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. You're also on Facebook, Bill Anderson. Are you on Twitter or anything?
No, I tried Twitter. It's almost too much for me. I can't, too much social stuff. I can't get into it all. It's the technology of it all. Oh, yeah. I'm lucky to have Skype, and you were the one that encouraged me for that. So I'm not on Twitter or anything else. It's mainly Facebook is my main thing. And I have best friends that will call me and leave a message on my phone. I'll never return their call, but they message me on Facebook, and within 3 seconds, I've already written them back. And it's like, I'm bigger on Facebook. It's just my social way of looking at things and doing things.
And you have great pictures you post on there. I will mix some of them into this interview.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for giving us this time. You have great stories. Hopefully, we can catch up with you again sometime down the road.
You name it, it'll be there for you, whatever you need.
Any closing remarks you want to let the fans know here to shut this off?
Well, I thank all the fans for their questions, and I know the Ultimate Warrior has been always a great topic to talk about, and I just hope people remember he was in an era that it was a little different than today. I don't know completely how Warrior's gimmick would work today. I don't follow the product so much today, but in the 80s it worked, in the late 80s, and it was a Road Warrior style. You didn't see the Road Warriors doing too many holds. You didn't see Brody doing too many holds. And it was just a style that he had, and it's a style that Vince wanted him to have, and probably more important, Pat Patterson wanted him to have, and influenced Vince and said, if it works, it works. Don't change what works. And if it's drawing 60,000 people or whatever with Paul Orndorff in Canada or Toronto or whatever that show was, whatever works is working. So why mess with a solid thing? So I hope people remember Warrior for some of his better qualities than what they saw. I know he rambled on in some interviews. I know I laugh at some that I saw that, he's snorting, looking at the sky, and it's funny to me. I don't know where he's heading.
That was the gimmick, though. That's what got him over.
Yeah, he was different. He was a different character, and I hope people remember him fondly. One of the greatest tributes to my life that ever happened was him mentioning my name in the Hall of Fame, his Hall of Fame ceremony in Red Bastien. Although, he says Billy Anderson and Red Bastien watching us beat the crap out of each other. They were beating the crap out of me. I could assure you. I went back to Red's apartment every single night, black and blue, because it was tough. It was tough training those guys. Not any disrespect to those guys, because they were green. They were just growing and learning. They were very respectful to me and Red, and never a cross word, never any problems with any of the 6 guys. And like I said, I was the smallest guy in there. Mark Miller would have probably been the second smallest, and he was just a little bit bigger in the arms than me, but I was the smallest guy in there then. Now I'd probably dwarf all of them.
Yeah,
in my bad way. So, but I thank you for this opportunity, and I thank the fans for caring and remembering through the years, and a lot of great things, and be more than happy to talk to you anytime you want.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Support us on patreon.com for $1.99 a month to watch our full shoot interviews ad-free and help our channel grow. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for instant updates.